Amid a writhing crowd of hungry monsters and roaring clouds of dust, one guy cuts through the chaos, his cloak snapping in the wind, standing his ground so fearless and unshakable it's like the evil around him doesn't even register. This guy's an alchemist. He twists multiple techniques together to forge something brand new, and on top of that, he can store it all away using spatial storage. Since alchemy can fix anything, he calmly reaches into his storage and pulls out several magic swords, made through alchemy, no doubt. A surge of staffs and a burst of light smashed down around him, and then, boom, dozens of swords flashed in and wiped the threat out in an instant. This guy isn't ordinary at all. He's a genius, a alchemist, a vacant ord. The system dies for good, and right then the capsule door bursts open, whipping brutal winds and blasting clouds of dust everywhere in seconds. When the capsule finally burst fully open, Vakenord slid out, gripping the structure's edge, testing the ground with one leg at a time as he stared around, stunned. Lost in a sea of unfamiliar landscapes, the boy slowly spun in place, staring at everything like it might bite, trying to figure out where he was, but every single thing around him screamed, "You don't belong here." All he could see was ruin, just broken rubble swallowed years ago by wild greenery, where a once beautiful building stood, reduced to nothing but a silent reminder of its former glory. Vakenord got hit with a brutal illness, and no matter how hard he fought or how he tried to cope, the disease clawed its way forward, slowly but surely, shattering the strong, healthy body he used to have. A brilliant plan hit him like lightning, so he tried the cradle of rebirth to wipe out his illness as a test, but it backfired hard. He crashed into a coma and slept for ages. The boy was flooded with pure, unstoppable joy. His whole body shook as the emotions hit like thunder. And when he finally realized all that effort paid off because he was still alive, a blinding happiness swallowed him whole. Bacon threw his head back, gulped a deep breath like he owned the moment, and felt it. His memory was still right there, and the illness that wrecked him had finally backed off, so the awful coughing fits were gone for good. He smirked with pure sarcasm, replaying the shouting and the panic from everyone he'd told about his idea. "You saw right." And the alchemist chuckled, because his experiment had worked. The hero snapped around out of nowhere, locked eyes with his reflection in the mirror, and froze. Because what he saw was so shocking, he stopped cold and stared hard, studying every detail. The body looks shockingly young again, like it's back at 20, bursting with fresh energy and the raw spark of its original youth. But this wasn't sad news at all, because the memories of the past still stayed with him, and deep down, he was still pushing over 40. With a grin so wide it practically lit up his face, Vaken blurted out that he was fired up to keep diving deeper into alchemy, the one thing he loved more than anything. But there was still one last question that burned just as bright. What happened here, and why was this lab wrecked? He snapped his fingers, and the alchemist ordered the test to be launched. That boy demanded answers from Zosmos, and in the dead hush, Bacon's order to his loyal assistant rang out. A tiny star-like light tore out of the sky and plunged down in an instant, blasting a blinding glare that lit everything up. Zosmos' reply ripped through the air. "He's a fairy, manufactured by Vaken and built to exist." Zosmos beamed at his friend like it was no time at all, even though it had been forever since they last met. Then he only answered when the owner called, because once the verification was done, 501 years and 17 days had officially slipped by. Vaken couldn't wrap his mind around it, so he blurted it out again. Terror clutched his chest as he shouted, "This can't be real, 50 to 21 years." The horror in his voice made it clear he couldn't process how something like that could even happen. He threw his hands up, stunned, blurting, "Wait, did I really sleep that long?" And the answer punched him in the chest. The alchemist had been out cold for 521 years inside the cradle of rebirth. But what happens to the lab? Where did everyone go? And what about the Morty's dynasty? Questions stacked up fast, yet answers didn't show up at all. I'll have to dive into the archives because Zosmos was stuck in sleep mode. After digging through the archives, the assistant flat out said there was nothing left. Then the hero erupted in shock, screaming, "How is that even possible? The sage is no longer functioning, so the archive data could be wrong." Plus the hero's freaking out, thinking about the war and catastrophe that hit him and how he needed to calm down. Zosimo's told him to write everything down. The hero dropped into a seat, grabbed his pen, and wrote down every last detail of what had just happened, plus the truth about his rebirth and how long he'd been asleep. After calming down just enough to breathe, Vakenord finally realized this wasn't bad at all. It was weirdly, insanely interesting. And yeah, for the alchemist, this was wildly fascinating. So wild he practically burst with excitement. He didn't just get reborn. Somehow he landed in a whole new time, and when the hero and the fairy saw it, they erupted in joy like they'd just pulled off the impossible. So much time had raged by. Alchemy had exploded past everything before it. Yet the alchemist just reveled in the wild heights it had reached, because he knew brand new, jaw-dropping discoveries were waiting right around the corner. As a researcher, he couldn't wait to stare down the future like it was his next big discovery. Until the world flipped, and suddenly everything felt like a totally different era. He grinned inside his head, picturing every city as it stands right now, seeing crowds swell and shift around him, streets transforming bit by bit as time passes and new trends sweep in. No one can say for sure how wildly the future shifted, so the hero decided to go check it himself and ordered the fairy to teleport him straight to the nearest city. He opened his eyes, and there was Vacant already perched on a ledge, staring down at the whole city laid out beneath him, like it was just another normal day. He scanned the street corners, baffled. How in the world could this be happening? Zosimo's, right beside his master, zipped over the rooftops, scanning everything as they flew. Vacant spun around, stunned, because he couldn't shake the fact that 500 years had blown by, and somehow the world around him looked nearly the same, while his dreams of a radically new future shattered the moment reality proved him wrong. After a while, his assistant finally cracked open the archive and pulled together key intel, small pieces, but right now, every single one was priceless. They ended up in the kingdom of Juri, right in the city of Sawan. Zosimo's declared that this country was already 200 years old and ruled by a king, backed by the aristocracy in a classic monarchy. But here's the wild part. There wasn't a single word about alchemists, not a whisper, not a name. It was like they never lived, never worked, and history itself had wiped them clean. Vacant and trying to stay calm, a parent let out a slow breath, still clearly weighed down by sadness and disappointment, like they were forcing all those trapped feelings out at once. The alchemist snapped, furious, insisting it couldn't be. There was no way, even as the fairy looked unimpressed. Alchemy can crack almost any problem humanity throws at it. It's vital to people, and it powers life in every field. No doubt about it. The hero brushed off the fairy's protests, saying the archives weren't enough and every truth had to be hunted down and verified on its own. But Zosimo's only had one shaky answer. Someone strange was running the sage's tower. Vacant strolled through the city streets, craning his head left and right, staring at the same buildings and the same faces sliding past him. Yet no matter how hard he searched, nothing out there sparked his interest or grabbed his attention. He finally reached the market and boom, bright colors everywhere, mouth-watering aromas in the air, fresh vegetables and juicy fruits stacked on every counter, plus warm baked goods calling his name. People zipped back and forth, chatting over what to buy, hunting for the best deals, and soaking up the whole lively vibe like it was pure comfort. Suddenly, Bacon clutched his stomach as it roared with hunger, pain spiking with every second, and the alchemist, still lost in his affairs, only then realized he hadn't eaten or drunk a thing in 500 years. He's in a panic to grab money for food. But after 521 years, the value of money has flipped so wildly that figuring out what he even needs is basically impossible. Vacant snapped his head around at the merchant's shout, and to his shock, the man actually spoke to him. Draped in a dark cloak, the young man gripped a tiny jar of glittering potion like it was life itself, swearing it was a healing draft to smash back his health and strength, and clutched an antidote too. With joy blazing in his eyes, Bacon barreled into the cellar, firing questions about whether he'd brewed the potion himself and whether that made him an alchemist. Then, once the answer was yes, he snatched the bottle straight from the young man in the cloak. The alchemist leaned in, eyes locked on the vessel and its contents, studying them so intensely it felt like he was dissecting the liquid's very composition, its taste and aroma, without even cracking the lid. But that happiness crashed fast. Turns out it was just trash. No potion at all, stuffed with the absolute cheapest ingredients he could possibly find. The hero's frown deepened. If he'd trained something that awful, he would have made himself redo it 100 times, no question. But maybe this merchant was just scraping by on tiny profits. Bacon's stomach erupted in a brutal growl, and all his questions got shoved aside because something else was screaming for his attention. So the merchant told him to head straight to the tavern across the street. Above the tavern door, a gorgeous wooden duck with wings spread flew in carved glory, and right beside it, in bold letters, hung the name, the Dancing Duck. The hungry alchemist leaned in with curious eyes, a tiny jolt of surprise in his expression, because this simple little building, plain on the outside yet genuinely beautiful, somehow made his chest feel warm, and he couldn't stop himself from smiling. The hero and his assistant locked eyes and agreed on one thing. The tavern looked insane, from that gorgeous wooden figurine all the way up to the roof itself. Zosimus brought up the huge problem, no money at all. But Bacon just shrugged it off like it wasn't even an issue. Naturally, he's an alchemist. His skills will sweep the costs aside, and if he's stuck washing dishes, he'll just whip up a special machine to do it for him. As he jabbed the bell to summon the employee, the hero blurted out his hope. Since he owned this tavern, the guy had to be kind, and if he just explained himself, he'd instantly get the whole story. A girl's silhouette snapped into view behind him, and she cut right through his thoughts with one sharp question. Who was she, and why did she end up here? When the girl finally got close, you could see the heartbreak on her face, arms locked across her chest, her light, wavy hair tucked neatly with a scarf. And with a heavy sigh, she told them the tavern was closed and ordered them to leave. The alchemist and his assistant panicked, like they'd stepped into the wrong room and everyone was ready to kick them out, because the hunger in their stomachs screamed louder than fear, and he started to explain himself to the girl, but her non-stop apologies cut him off mid-sentence. Tears streamed down the girl's face until her eyes went glassy, because her father lay bedridden with a brutal illness, and she was the only one left to keep the tavern afloat. Bacon snapped to attention at that, seized the moment, and introduced himself as an alchemist before offering his help. While the girl was still reeling in shock, the alchemist and the fairy were already buzzing about the chance to pay for the room with medical services, until that shock flipped straight into fury. She snapped out of their frantic thoughts, swung her arm, and slammed the intruder right in the face with everything she had. Wham! A thunderous bang tore through the whole building. With tears spilling down her face, the blonde blurted out that she'd never trust that alchemist again, because after her father drank his vitamins, he suddenly fell ill. Bacon couldn't hide his shock. He practically begged his daughter to let him in so he could help the tavern owner, and she shut him down cold. The hero refused to back down. He even offered his help for free. But the girl wouldn't budge under all that persuasion. So tell me, how could anyone buy words that sweet? Once the girl finally steadied her breathing and lined up her thoughts, she turned to him and went for it, asking the question on her mind. Why wouldn't he stop? Why was he pushing so hard to help her father? Zosimus stepped in and took control, and as he praised the tavern, saying anyone could tell the owner was a genuinely good man, his master just nodded along while the girl's certainty started to crack. Bacon's assistant fires up the girl by praising the alchemist as super experienced, then immediately nudges her to speak up. "What's your name?" she answers. "Fiora, I'm just a waitress here at this tavern." Zosimus stepped up, introduced himself, and claimed he was an artificial fairy, made by his master, who shoved all his knowledge right into him. When he finally wanted to introduce his master, he just strolled right past like nothing happened. because it looked like he'd already flipped into alchemist mode, laser-focused on the problem. The assistant proudly introduced his master as an empty-voiced master, right as he was already rushing into the room, with the sick man trailing behind the girl. In a warm, comfy room tucked in the corner, a bed sat cradling a sick man, fully covered up, barely breathing, frozen in place like his soul had slipped into another world. The alchemist closed the distance, and when he finally saw it, his stomach dropped. This man was decomposing while still alive, face riddled with vile ulcers, and his skin looked like it was literally peeling off the fabric of his face. Bacon instantly understood. This wasn't just potion poisoning at all. This was way worse than he ever imagined. Toxins breaking down inside him made his body start rotting from the inside out, and it was absolutely horrifying to witness. His daughter choked back tears and told him, "Dad fell into a coma the day before, and the moment it happened, this awful stench started flooding the room. And it was way worse than the alchemist ever dared to imagine. It's downright outrageous. This so-called alchemist is totally incompetent, and yeah, irresponsible too, because not only do they hawk trash-tier goods, but their treatments actively make everything spiral even further out of control. This isn't something he'll ever forgive, and that's why Vacant erupted in brutal rage. The whole situation hit him like a punch, and it tore open a storm of emotions inside him, burning with fury. With pure determination burning in his chest, he shot his hand up to change everything. And the moment he did, a gentle, cozy light wrapped his arm, spilling warmth through the air. He was all swagger and raw strength, locked in on the mission. Because this was the moment he'd prove to everyone what he could really do. He didn't even pause his work. He barked an order to the fairy to find out what had driven the patient to be in that state. He snapped his hand forward, scrawling a weird glowing symbol in the air, and at the same time kept pushing his assistant A again and again. A minute later, an alchemical pot slammed into the room, opening up a tiny inner space where you can synthesize and swap out conceptual information from all kinds of substances. Meanwhile, Zosmos cracked the truth. The whole problem came from a botched potion, fatigue and stamina recovery, prepared all wrong. Bacon seethed with fury, because that's exactly what sparked the poisoning in the first place, and any rookie in alchemy knows you're supposed to shut that down before it happens. The worried girl spun toward the alchemist, heart pounding as she begged to know if her father would be okay. Yet the alchemist barely even blinked, swallowed whole by his work. He kept drawing signs in the air. Only now both hands moved at once, steady and confident, like he finally knew exactly what he was doing. He stood there as gentle streams of wind curled around him, and 4 glowing circles snapped into place right above his head. With a steady, serious focus etched across his face, he caught the moment's outcome and smiled, clearly thrilled that she'd gotten away so lucky. From all 4 circles, ingredients spilled out for a potion. An unknown herb, a couple of bottles, and a mysterious pouch. The alchemist reassured her, telling her not to fret about her father, because he was right here and he'd step in to help him. He tipped his head back and let himself feel it, free, calm, and finally at peace again. And around him, like a spell had been cast, streams of energy and glowing light swirled through the air, filling him with pure joy. As soon as the ingredients were fully in place, the Vacant guided them straight into the alchemical pot, and they shot in so fast they left behind a searing trail of light and even a soft, lingering breeze. The pot started glowing in a way that felt impossible, like a living flame had ignited inside it, and its warm light spread through the whole room, wrapping everything in cozy comfort. The alchemist flung his arms wide and kept forging waves of energy and blazing rays of light. Then he realized, with a jolt, that he loved every second. He truly believed that studying alchemy and putting it into practice didn't just sharpen him and push his growth forward. It also gave him the power to help build a bright future for all of humanity. No matter what happened to alchemy while he slept for 500 years, people never stopped chasing something better, always reaching for a bright future, again and again. Because that hunger is just part of being human. That's why Vacant, and the other alchemists threw themselves into study after study, again and again, refusing to stop until they'd found a way to make life better for everyone around them. The alchemist couldn't forget his comrades' faces, how they studied new wonders side by side, pushed through every brutal obstacle, and grew stronger together. With his eyes shut tight, he snapped his arms across his face, pop, and the whole room jolted as the hero geared up for the final step. He barked the command "Create," snapped his eyes open, and blasted streams of light swirling through the room like chaos, until, after just a heartbeat, they slammed together into one blazing, sparkling star that lit everything up. The lights died out, and right there, the alchemist already had Arunia's spiritual medicine cupped in his hands, ready to shut down the poison's symptoms and kickstart her body's regeneration. Right after the order came down to administer the medicinal potion, Zosmos leaned in and started soaking it up from the open jar like a sponge. Then he shot straight up over the patient and hovered there, dumping everything straight onto the bed. The medicine rained down on the tavern owner like enchanted dust, sparkling in the sunlight, and the moment it hit, his face cleared fast, and a healthier color rushed back into his skin. Zosmos wrapped up his work and told them the body would bounce back in just a couple hours, and sure enough, the medicine was already doing its job, putting a faint, almost invisible calm smile on the man's face. Vaken spun to the girl and promised her everything would be fine with her father, no doubt. But she didn't buy it. Her face stayed blank with confusion, because she had no idea what had just happened. The alchemist grinned, pleased as punch with his handiwork. This medicine would crush the man's strength, sure, but it would also make him feel better, so he just had to buy him 2 or 3 more days of rest. Sensing the opening, the guy begged to stay in the tavern for a while, determined to watch the patient's condition like a hawk. The assistant was terrified the girl would blab about the weird flying cube, because nobody here even knows artificial creatures exist. Yet Fiora clearly didn't have a clue what it was. The young waitress blurted out a wave of happy tears, her face lighting up with a warm, honest smile, and she couldn't even find the words to thank them. Vaken met her gaze and flashed a warm smile, because in his heart, he was only doing what an alchemist must do, answering his calling and serving the people. Her eyes went wide with pure shock, like she'd pictured alchemists in a totally different world until this moment. A few days later, while Vaken ate, he let out a heavy sigh, kept his fork hovering near his mouth, and admitted he'd been talking about his powers. He still hadn't fully snapped back to normal, and some of his strength was gone. Zosmos nodded as his master's logic clicked into place. Something had truly shifted inside him. His magic got weaker, his brain power dulled, even his psyche had regressed, so he needed to tread carefully. The grieving alchemist swallowed his loss and accepted that he'd grown weaker. And then, out of nowhere, an elbow slammed into the back of his head, cutting his thoughts clean in half. Cheerful tavern owner Edgar, grinning like the world's best host, juggled a huge, juicy hunk of meat in his hands and leaned in with sincere concern, coaxing the young guy at the table to take more bites, since he was Edgar's debtor. Vaken awkwardly tried to turn him down, but Edgar wouldn't budge. A young body needs to eat a ton. And with that tavern's ridiculously tasty food, the guy somehow piled on about 5 kilograms. The Dancing Duck's owner tapped the guy on the shoulder and promised him it was all free. Then the alchemist slipped back fast, insisting he still wanted to pay for everything. Edgar asked if Vaken was going to join the Adventurers Guild, saying it was the easiest way for a traveler to earn money, but the kid just stared back, stunned. Wait, who even were adventurers? The tavern owner jabbed a finger out the window at a towering building and told me it was the guild, then practically begged me to register there, just in case. The archives say the Aventurists are the closest thing this era has to alchemists, and yeah, they'll earn their money by any means they have to. Armed with iron determination, the legendary alchemist who'd been asleep for 500 years strode toward that towering masterpiece, and the grateful Ophianta only raised a hand to wave him on. The alchemist charged up to the bridge that would lead him straight into the guild's entrance, where banners snapped in the wind. A watchtower loomed over everything, and the facade shimmered like it was begging for trouble. Alchemy isn't the same anymore, and a fresh threat is already stirring. The first-generation alchemist woke up stunned. He'd been asleep for 521 years, and now rough men in hulking armor were all around him, roaring loud, their heavy plates shouting one thing: pure, brutal strength. He always tried to keep his cool and stay out of trouble, but the second he stepped into the guild, a bunch of men closed in on him, radiating pure disdain and open hostility. Confused out of his mind, the lost vacant guy threw up his hands in apology, then tried to explain, laying out exactly what was wrong with him and why he set off that reaction. An hour ago, the boy stormed across that bridge straight into the guild's path, brimming with confidence and grit. And now he was practically buzzing with anticipation for what hit him the moment those gates opened. He stared at it from the inside, eyes blazing with awe, and Zosmos, bursting with curiosity, shot right out to see what was going on all around him. Candelabras glowed overhead. The place stretched up 2 floors. The first floor overflowed with tables and benches, and the hall buzzed with people of every kind. The adventurers dove into the celebration, laughing, stuffing their faces and downing drinks. So spills splattered the floor and food flew everywhere, but nobody even cared. Vacant stood there, itching to see all the incredible things this place had to offer, until, right in the middle of his wonder, someone suddenly called his name and snapped him out of it. A hard-eyed warrior jabbed his finger at the hero and snapped that this place wasn't meant for a kid like him. And yeah, you could see why, because he was getting called out by one of the veteran adventurers, Beowulf. Still smiling, Bacon told Beowulf how he'd trekked in from a far-off land and been told to hunt for work here. And Beowulf didn't like that one bit. He just grinned and fired back, asking if that was the real reason Bacon wanted to be an adventurer. With that same kind smile still on his face, the guy kept staring down the stern warrior, while the warrior's expression contorted with pure confusion and sharp anger, making him look even more terrifying. The warrior didn't hesitate. He spun around fast, jabbed his finger at the reception desk, and motioned the boy to follow him. While the other adventurers cracked up laughing, Beowulf got stuck babysitting the newbie again. And yeah, he seemed to love it. Totally ignoring their laughter, the veteran called Shirley to get the newbie registered. Shirley, the Adventurers Guild administrator, beamed and clapped her hands, bursting with joy to meet Beowulf and the newcomer. Shirley tried to include War, but he shut it down. He swore he'd be an adventurer forever. And then he slammed a heavy hand onto Vacan's shoulder, declaring he'd be one too. With a warm, heartfelt smile, the administrator greeted the brand-new arrival, who had just stepped into their legendary Adventurers Guild. The alchemist fumbled his scratching and admitted he had zero clue who adventurers were or what they actually did, then quickly realized he had to clear it up and demanded a more detailed explanation. Shirley and Beowulf locked eyes in silence, and right then, it clicked that his questions weren't landing right, because they were starting to worry everyone. A fresh batch of the couple's new acquaintances went pale with fear as the veteran jabbed a trembling finger at the alchemist and demanded, "How do you show up here with zero idea how adventurers work?" The first-generation alchemist stammered that he'd come from some super remote place, trying to pass it off. While Beowulf wondered where that man came from, tribe or jungle, the administrator steadied her nerves, then made herself heard with a deliberate cough, ready to lay out every last detail. Adventurers are the folks who jump on the guild's quests, pick which missions they want on their own, and rake in rewards once they're done. Yeah, that's what the girl explained. Now everything clicks. These guys are basically jacks of all trades in the vacant era, and it turns out it was alchemists who made it happen. As the boy absorbed every word, Beowulf jabbed his finger toward the job waiting for him and told the newcomer, "Watch closely, study hard, so you'll finally understand what you're about to face." B.O. picked up a mission to hunt down a huge, deadly beast that was out of control, And the ad even showed its picture. Straight up terrifying. Viken started reading. Then the beast unleashed terror on the locals and stalked the western forest. But right before he could finish the part about the reward, time ran out. The adventurer had already rounded up his crew for the mission, then told the newcomer he didn't have to tally a single reward. Beowulf and his team would take it all, and once the job was done, they'd blow off steam and have fun. The alchemist blinked in shock. He had no clue a whole group was sliding into a mission, but after a moment of thought he shrugged and picked a new one instead. Shirley, though, jumped in to straighten everything out. What class was vacant, a mage or a warrior? With a grin and a roar, that confident, pumped-up guy declared he was vacant. An amazing alchemist, the kind you can't ignore. Shirley stared at him in shock, and every adventurer in the crowd went dead silent, burning with disdain as the whole air turned heavy and stifling. As the adventurers huffed with pure irritation, Vacant stood there completely clueless. No clue what was going on or why everyone's reaction was so violently intense. The administrator awkwardly fumbled out 3 announcements and insisted those were the only jobs alchemists had. While the crowd erupted in laughter, he just stood there, totally baffled, screaming in his head. How is this all they've got? Why so few? The more they jabbered, the more the alchemist's hope crumbled. Those short-sighted adventurers kept debating who was even doing alchemy these days, and he knew the truth. A guy from far-off lands like that wouldn't get it. Nobody could explain why alchemists were getting robbed of respect, and that truth felt terrifying, because asking it meant I might end up embarrassing myself for nothing. After digging through the ads, Veckin slid one sheet to Shirley with total confidence. This order was the one he was ready to crush. The administrator snapped that brewing the healing potion for the order would be brutal, then leaned in and said the newcomer had a full week to master every last tricky detail. Suddenly, Vacant got boxed in by adventurers from every direction. One guy even draped an arm over his shoulder, and the whole crowd erupted in laughter, taunting him and begging him to finish the useless support they claimed he was only pretending to help with. When the alchemist, totally baffled, demanded why they were spouting all that, the crowd exploded in loud laughter, mocking this boy as nothing but a fool. 2 mages stepped forward, blasting their magic to steal the spotlight, then grinned like they owned the moment, saying magic and miracles settle everything now, and that mages and clerics are the ultimate support classes. After they wrapped up their speeches and patted themselves on the back, they smirked and basically told the newcomer, "Don't expect much from us." All they cared about was whether he could whip up useful potions and hand them over, because that was the whole extent of what he was allowed to do. Bacon was so lost he blurted out his question: were magic and miracles really powered only by magic and divine force? And Ken nodded, confirming it was exactly that. Then the alchemists convinced themselves they could fix everything on the spot, just for a moment. Because they couldn't rely on universal potions they could brew any time. Everything clicked into place, igniting the hero's fire. And that's why adventurers banded together in groups. Try to go solo, and you'd stack up way too many cracks and exposed weak spots. But those words didn't spark joy in the crowd at all. People closed in from every angle, pinning him against the wall until he couldn't move or break free from the crush. The furious warriors screamed so hard the sound bounced through the whole building and beyond, and it left everyone stunned. How in the world could an alchemist say something like that out loud, when Vacant should have kept his thoughts to himself? But that furious crowd of adventurers wouldn't cool off. They kept railing that alchemists' tricks are nothing next to magic and miracles, demanding the guys just brew their potions quietly and mess around with pebbles. Vakenord was absolutely crushed. Alchemy had rotted away that badly in the 500 years he'd been gone. He suddenly recalled that street merchant he'd met a few days back, selling healing potions that were basically garbage, and honestly, that felt like the new normal. The alchemists were trapped in the worst kind of mess imaginable. His dream got crushed by cold reality. He truly believed alchemy would skyrocket into never-before-seen heights and spill secrets nobody had even uncovered yet. Secrets that could rewrite the whole world. He whipped around, face set in stone, and charged straight toward the administrator while the crowd's angry shouts rained down on him. He set a box of healing potions on the counter and demanded where to deliver them. And just moments after the crowd had been loudly cursing him, all that rage melted into total confusion. Shirley gasped in shock, asking where all that potion was coming from, because the alchemist hadn't just followed an order at all. He'd secretly prepared the whole box in advance. The adventurers still wouldn't cool off, stunned to their core, because these potions are brutally hard to brew, so one of them snatched a bottle off the ground and blurted, "It's just carbonated bottled water." The alchemist didn't even flinch. He was sure his potion would prove himself, so when the man reached for the bottle and started to inspect it, he suddenly went still, because what spilled into view was a breathtaking potion so vibrant and glossy it practically demanded attention. After checking every last bit, he confidently declared this potion was probably useless. Yet with the crowd roaring in happy laughter, he clenched his teeth and greedily swallowed that strange medicine anyway. In the next instant, shock slammed onto his face, and a brutal surge of power ripped through his body like a storm trying to burst out. That medicine was pure magic. His long-lost finger that the warrior had given up on years ago snapped back in like it had never vanished at all. The warrior's hands shook as he stared at them, stunned, because he had no clue if this potion was pulling him into a dream or locking him into reality, and he'd never seen anything like it before. He barreled into the alchemist, desperate to learn how that potion was brewed, and Vakin stared at him in shock, then only asked one question that hit like a gut punch. What if the finger hadn't grown back at all? The adventurer whipped his head away, bit down on his lip, and fought to hold back the flood of tears. Then joy won, and they spilled down his cheeks anyway. He burst into tears like a kid and lunged for an empty hug. Then the truth hit. That man was once a hunter. Losing his finger forced him into a new class, but now he's back with a bow, ready to hunt again. The other adventurers went still as the newcomer poured out gratitude. Then the healer raved about this healing potion, claiming it could cure every affliction. A deathly hush swallowed the room, thick as fog, as every adventurer snapped to silence, stiff, frozen, and unable to even breathe out a word, because nobody saw that outcome coming. Every adventurer snapped their head around and bolted for the administration desk, colliding mid-run, toppling each other, and stirring up a cloud of dust from the floor. Once the crowd finally quieted, Shirley swallowed her nerves and called out into the empty air. Then the demand for healing potions surged, so she slammed a stack of papers onto the table. Vakin let out a shaky breath because, this wasn't his plan, but maybe it was for the best, until the roar of orders hit him and fear crawled up his spine. Then the crowd started buzzing again and the alchemist's eyes snapped toward it. What was happening? The once raging men rubbed their hands like they were starving for it, glaring at the alchemist's potions they just ordered, eyes blazing, practically trembling with the urge to pounce on that guy right then and there. Every bit of it was written across their faces, and Zosimus just couldn't wrap his head around how things spiraled into this. Vakinord lifted his head with fire in his chest and swore, "This is it, my moment to prove I've got the real alchemy power." After a while, he wiped the sweat off his face and slammed another box of potions onto the table. It had to be the last one. And then, boom, Bacon swept the remaining ones too fast, leaving everyone stunned. Heavy footsteps thundered at the guild entrance, impossible to ignore, and every head snapped toward the doors as a determined figure, slowly, steadily, approached, drawing everyone's eyes with pure anticipation. This was a battered Beowulf, his armor soaked in blood, his hands slick, even his head pouring with wounds, and he crushed the pain down by biting down hard through his teeth. Seeing B.O. crumpled like that, Bacon's panic flared and he snapped, "What happened to the war? What drove you into this?" The alchemist stared at Beowulf in shock as he stumbled into the guild, every step screaming exhaustion, blood soaking the floor, and that massive sword thumping on his back. The newcomer stared in disbelief, wondering what crushed the veteran adventurer, and he couldn't even wrap his head around how it all happened. He was fearless to the core, when they had to run for their lives from a beast that was way tougher than anyone expected. He still refused to stay down and vowed to sprint back into the fight after a quick breather to back up his comrades. Vaken reached into the stack of healing potions. He just handed out to the whole guild and thrust one straight into Beowulf's hands. Proud as hell, the brand new adventurer bragged that he'd brewed the potion with his own hands, and when the warrior downed it without hesitation, he actually told himself, "It can't possibly get worse than this." But this potion's power blew his mind way harder than he ever dared to imagine. 1 second later, a violent surge of strength and energy slammed through his body and filled every inch of him. His wounds were totally gone, like that desperate fight he'd fled from never even happened. And when he stared down, the spot where blood was spilling just a minute ago stunned him. As Beowulf spun around to ask the alchemist how he pulled it off, the newcomer was already boxed in by a crowd of wide-eyed fans, and everyone erupted into applause, so loud it made him blush, awkward and embarrassed under all that staring. The warrior couldn't fully wrap his head around what just happened, but he was thrilled. Vacant was stealing the spotlight, and his potion kicked in, sealing his wounds and snapping back the strength he'd lost in battle. He turned back to help his comrades, but the alchemist slammed the brakes, then pointed with stubborn resolve and shoved a few bottles into his hands, swearing they'd be exactly what he needed. The veteran gladly took the help, then strode off, waving like a farewell commander and swearing that when he came back, they'd clink drinks together to celebrate the win. Zosimos just crossed his fingers that the warrior could survive and hold his own against the monster. The assistant also spilled the discovery of the sage's tower's traces, right toward the western forest, where monster battles are still raging. Vacant Orid's heart lit up. This is huge. The sage's tower can be his home, and it'll also stash all his alchemy gear, materials, and tools in one place. Right when the guy strutted toward the guild exit like he owned the place, Shirley slammed into his path and told the alchemist, loud and clear, he wasn't going anywhere. Shirley's resolve was unmistakable. She leaned in and demanded the terrified, hollow-eyed guy answer one question. Did he actually read the guild's license agreement before joining? After that crushing "no," the administrator snapped into action and pulled the brand new adventurer aside, ready to break down every key rule and regulation for this place in full detail. The guild runs on a strict ranking ladder, rank 10 at the bottom, rank 1 at the top, and they hand out missions based on where you stand, with tasks you can take only at your current rank so everyone gets work that matches their skill and experience. Vacant snapped when he learned he'd been placed at rank 10, which meant he couldn't tag along with Beowulf's team to hunt dangerous monsters. Plus, Shirley was dead certain an alchemist had no business on the front lines. The administrator slammed a stack of orders on the desk and told him he could pick from those, only those, no exceptions. That girl grinned, snatched the top sheet of paper, and leaned in like she couldn't wait, hoping the new kid couldn't help but look her way. Shirley clocked that none of it was working, inched in from behind, nudged his shoulder, and murmured right in his ear that once she started drinking from him, she might just end up falling in love. Not ready for that kind of pressure, he bolted straight for the exit, sprinting from the threats while the grinning girl stayed right behind. And while Shirley smirked like she'd just won something, secretly asking herself if she pushed it too far, Vacant bolted straight into the western forest. No matter how hard the alchemist pushed, the girl couldn't sway him to change his mind. Then, with zero hesitation, the guy charged straight into the heart of the forest where the battle was raging. What doubts could possibly linger? If there were even one shred of alchemical material here, Bacon had no business sitting out. He couldn't miss a chance this big. Zosimos finally cracked who his master really was, and the clues pointed straight at him fleeing from Shirley. What kills me is his master's already over 40, yet he still has no girlfriend, and he smugly claims that any real researcher puts women on the back burner. The alchemist finally arrived at the battlefield and cut through the hesitation. Warriors were desperately holding off the evil monsters, but the horde just kept overwhelming them. Bacon scanned his surroundings with laser focus, trying to grasp just how deadly and brutal this situation really was. Beowulf realized this was pure disaster. He shoved the monster back with every ounce of strength, but his comrades were already dropping, unable to stay upright anymore. From behind the trees, the ultimate terror burst out, the great mag beast, the lesser Tarrasque. The second it opened its mouth, it unleashed a roar so loud it rattled the air, and those razor-sharp teeth were bared like a death sentence. Zosimus tore through the archives and confirmed they'd found a brand new species. And Vaken instantly saw that whatever he could pull from it would be brand new too. Beowulf clocked the alchemist and lit into him. What was he even doing here? This isn't a playground for beginners, and that monster is way too strong. The alchemist sank into his own head, tuning out everything around him, his face turning oddly calm. Yet a sharp, grim warning curled in his expression, casting a dark, mysterious shadow over him. Beowulf lunged to stop him, but the moment was already gone. Vaken just kept muttering under his breath, talking materials and counting up all the new stuff he could grab. The instant the fight was on, his storage holes flew open again, and 4 blazing stones shot out like a promise. Now the real question hit. Where would the alchemist start hunting for the monster's weak spot? The stones the boy clutched weren't just random rocks at all. They had a special pull, like living symbols of the 4 main elements, each one acting like an artifact with a soul. Vaken barely even had a second to doubt. He snapped to the answer right away. Burn it all down, give up everything at once. Beowulf's crew stared in stunned disbelief as the alchemist hurled all 4 stones at the monsters, unleashing everything he had. Some burned alive in the flames and couldn't claw their way out. Others froze solid in ice. Some got ripped into the sky by a raging tornado and smashed back down with a thunderous roar. And the rest didn't escape either. Lightning slammed them with deadly strikes. The adventurers stood there, stunned, because this wasn't even magic. It was something stranger, like the objects themselves had turned into weapons, and they'd never seen power like that before. Vaken didn't even consider stopping. He kept hurling stones, and Beowulf and his crew barely had time to duck out of the way. Only after the whole clearing was carpeted with monster carcasses did the alchemist finally stop. Then the earlier screams of pain faded away, dissolving into the air. He didn't even get a second to figure out the monster's weakness. Turns out they were incredibly frail, but shock still sat right on the adventurers' faces. With a smug chuckle, the alchemist decided fire was the deadliest tool after all, and he didn't even notice how terrifying he looked, fully lost in his own thoughts and amused mind games. But now, those warriors were hit with pure dread the second they saw him, because somehow, he looked even more terrifying than they ever expected. Vaken snapped his head toward the last monster still standing, his creepy grimace locked on it as he zeroed in after his elemental stones. He stood toe-to-toe with the massive, roaring monster, face rock-steady. Zero fear, not a single flinch at its piercing roar, as if it had already become his real challenge, and he was ready to step straight into the fight. Circles burst open on the floor and streams of light shot up, trapping the alchemist in their glow, so the question hit hard. What was this monster's weakness, and how did you even take it down? He was determined to figure it out. From those circles, elemental magic swords tore into existence, blazing with lights as they burst through. Vaken went dead serious, eyes locked on the power this massive monster might unleash. The next second, the guy yanked a magical instrument, and his trusty weapon from his storage, an alchemist's staff. The moment he pulled it free, he swung hard and barked, "Now go." Every sword he had yanked out snapped its tip straight at the monster, poised to land the killing strike. The very next second, they both launched forward in perfect sync, ripping through space at the speed of light. Dozens of swords came crashing down on the tiny Tarrasque in a heartbeat. Its only reply was a helpless, pained growl. The simple monster wasn't simple at all. It planted itself on its feet like it owned the place, shocking the alchemist who'd expected his moves to hit harder, and leaving the whole adventurer team staring in stunned disbelief. With one savage yank, he snapped the main monster's head clean off, And that final monster in the whole group was gone for good. A gigantic carcass and its head slammed onto the ground with a gut-wrenching crash, splattering the earth in thick, oozing blood. And that monster was finally, absolutely finished. The adventurers just stared, mouths hanging open as all of it unfolded. Because seriously, how could an alchemist pull off stunts like this, and at that age? And the worst part of all, 500 years ago, the very first alchemists were out hauling materials themselves, so they weren't even locked in some lab, mixing potions and taking it easy. And this monster ended up just another victim of one of the deadliest alchemists, Vaken Orda. A grin never left his face as he brandished a razor-sharp knife and greedily carved out the rare, valuable material he needed for his ruthless experiments. Soon enough, Bacon was already inside the tavern, the dancing duck. Suddenly, a bag stuffed with coins toppled onto the table and clanged like thunder. Then the coins exploded outward, rattling the whole surface non-stop. The alchemist snapped his eyes up from his work and demanded, "Beowulf, what kind of money did you dump out?" And the answer hit hard. It was the reward for wiping out the Lesser Tarrasque, even though the kid only carried the materials he'd hauled in. The adventurer snapped his head up and swore that a reward earned by your own grit is basically an adventurer's law. So no way was he backing down. The warrior even cut a deal with the administrator, insisting Vaken was just a temporary stand-in, even though it wasn't his job. And once the arguing stopped, the guy took the money like it was destiny, vowing to pour it into building a brand new laboratory. While the man was thanking Beowulf for the funding, his eyes locked on the alchemist's work. Then the alchemist lit up with excitement at the question and decided to show off what he'd been cooking. Bacon was cooking up a stove that ditched wood altogether. Then he proudly unveiled it with 40 temperature settings, a fire protection system, and a heat-saving boost that made it run smarter. Beowulf was already waving off the stubborn tales about some fool who just wanted to turn the alchemist's wisdom into tavern smoke, until Theo barged in out of nowhere, and the whole scene went dead quiet. That's what Vacant called her. The girl beamed, clasping her hands to her chest, and when she saw the incredible invention, pure joy lit her up like a spark. Seeing that reaction, the alchemist thrust his hands toward the stove and told the girl to use his creation, betting she'd rush over and hug him to say thanks. Somewhere, the emptiness misfired. This joy wasn't meant for him or his creation at all. The girl swept up to him and demanded what he'd left behind here, and the alchemist's disappointment crashed over him like a wave he couldn't stop. The waitress lingered by Beowulf, and it totally killed the guy's mood. She even waved him toward a meal in the tavern, while Vaken, baffled, snapped, "How the heck does Theo know Beowulf?" To his shock, the girl leaned in and told him he was the strongest adventurer in the whole city. So of course, everyone already knew his name. The alchemist got blindsided by a situation he never saw coming, and confusion slammed into him. He huffed, puffed up his cheeks, and muttered some messy, half-worded complaint about how everyone's obsessed with Beowulf wasn't the talk of the town right now. Everyone was fixated on that mysterious alchemist with unbelievable power, whose potions could cure anything. Just a little later, Beowulf and the Vikings charged straight for the Sullivan Adventurers Guild. Just as you reached the entrance, the crowd erupted and slammed into you, all begging the alchemist to join their groups, some even ready to brawl just to force him into your team and steal his powers for themselves. It all blew up because rumors about the great alchemist, towering genius, unmatched skill, the kind of talent everyone craved, spread like wildfire, and even though people threw dozens of offers at him, he shut every single one down. He burned with one goal: open his own lab and turn his wild ideas into real projects. And he was ready to welcome anyone who wanted to jump in and help him make it happen. Beowulf helped the guy push back the restless crowd by herding everyone to Shirley's desk. And boom! Warriors and mages started sprinting in to shove their requests onto the reception desk. But it turns out he wasn't playing the hero. He had other motives. The adventurer pulled out the order and begged the Vacant to team up for this mission. Beowulf flashed his most pleading face, praying it would sway Ken. but it barely landed because Ken just stood there, completely unaffected. That deal didn't mean the alchemist was being thrown into the Black Dogs, aka the veteran's crew. Right when the warrior was fired up, laying out his thoughts about the escort mission that promised to be brutal, a newcomer burst into the guild and cut him off mid-sentence. Vivi, the Black Dog's mage, was the one crazy enough to pull this off, and the moment you saw him, you knew he had zero plans to team up with an alchemist, especially one that young. Vivi bragged with full confidence that if he'd been by the Black Dogs when they clashed with the monsters, they'd have handled everything themselves, and that having some kid tag along would only slow them down. As Vaken came into view, the mage glared like he could pierce his defenses with sheer sight, and Vivi snapped, bearing his attitude loud and sharp, then ordered the alchemist to get out of here. The Black Dog's commander tried to steady his mage, but the guy wouldn't hear a word. He just erupted in a furious scream about being done babysitting helpless, clueless adventurers. Vivi loathed alchemists like they were the biggest parasites on Earth. Then he whipped his magic wand and blasted a whirlwind straight at Vaken. Lucky for him, the boy snapped into action and leaped out of the blast at the last second. While everyone scrambled to stop the mage from smashing the guild, that guy couldn't shake one question. Why on earth did people hate alchemists in this world? It crushed him every single time. Still, Vaken threw Vivi a chance to talk and spill everything out, even after he'd already wrecked half the guild, and Vivi's magician self had zero intention of listening. Like every other alchemist in town, he refused the blame for mirror space. Mirror space is a wild idea that flips reality on its head, like there's another world out there, a perfect, no-mistakes copy of our own. Long ago, alchemists ran massive experiments across these worlds, because their wild, powerful weaponry couldn't always be tested safely in the real one. At last, Beowulf ripped open the veil of secrecy and spilled the truth behind Vivi's brutal rage. His older sister, trapped in mirror space after an accident, was locked there forever. The mage nodded and backed up his commander's claim. Then they snatched his sister away the moment she showed even a hint of interest in the Magic Academy, and right away they started pushing her through tests with an artifact called Darby's Mirror. Looks like this artifact got dumped about 500 years ago, so how the heck did it crawl back into our time? Vivi's rage kept climbing. His sister wasn't coming back, she was trapped there forever, and not a single alchemist dared take responsibility for it. The magician was gasping for breath, yet he didn't even think about stopping. He lunged in again, swinging at empty air just to strike, blasting through his rant about how he wanted to wipe out every alchemist. He clutched the guy's hand like his life depended on it, yanking him close to stop the next round of blows. Vaken, even as rage practically rolled off his opponent in waves, stayed eerily calm, smiling at Vivi, who was boiling over with fury. And that's when the alchemist knew he had to step in and help. Rage boiled higher and higher inside the mage. What could this kid possibly do? Vivi had spent his entire life clawing his way to become a mage for one reason, finding his sister, and now he finally knew he'd need the sacred bell of Fulcanelli to make it happen. The adventurers had only ever heard of this kind of invention, like it was pure fairy tale magic, not something real. And that's why Vivi was falling apart, because he knew his little sister would be trapped there forever. If only he had that spell, he could finally bring his older sister back. Because the mage, crushed by grief and drowning in despair, snapped and started sobbing, clutching his head as his heart shattered. And while the other adventurers felt for their comrade, Bacon probably had something brewing. He grinned like he knew a secret and slipped his hand into his pocket. From that moment, he yanked out Fulcanelli's sacred bell, grinned, and pressed it into Vivi's hands. It felt like a cruel mockery, not a single laugh. This magician had been hunting a way to save his sister for ages, and then the boy pulled it off like it was nothing, just reaching into his pocket for a bell that doesn't even belong in this world. The alchemist swore it was the sacred bell of Fulcanelli, no doubt about it. But Vivi and the commander of the Black Dogs snapped with fury. hearing it like a cruel joke they couldn't accept in a moment this serious. Then Viking yanked out a mirror, ready to put on a show, because to rescue anyone trapped and handle the disasters that struck, the sacred bell of Fulcanelli had to be forged. The moment the mirror space theory hit the page, people churned out a bunch of wild artifacts, only for them to glitch, misfire, and spark accidents. As Vakin got ready to unleash the mysterious artifact, he let out a heavy breath, but irritation and pure frustration kept swelling inside him, because nothing around him was going even remotely his way. Back then, this spell was carved into every corner, yet the Royal Academy, one of the most prestigious schools around, still can't crack something that looks this simple, and that leaves everyone asking why. He slipped deeper into his own thoughts, using the bell to keep hunting for the girl trapped in that mirror space. And one brutal question wouldn't leave him alone. Could he really bring alchemy back to this world? The alchemist found her, ripped her into his world, and the room detonated with blinding, glowing light pouring out of the mirror. He jerked his hand again and again, gritting his teeth as he fought with everything he had to drag the girl closer to this world. In the blazing glare, a girl's silhouette slowly surfaced, like she was crawling out of the mirror, washed in a jaw-dropping, magnificent glow. The moment the girl got sucked into this world, the mirror shattered into razor-bright pieces, blasting around the room with a violent crack, sparkling flashes everywhere, like the universe itself just threw the ultimate mystery at her. A faint blush clung to the girl's cheeks as she dozed, sound asleep. Then a light breeze ripped from the shattered mirror parts, whipping through the air and gently mussing her hair. Nobody in that room saw it coming, except Vacant, who smiled like he'd already won. He'd pulled the same move again. She slammed straight into her rescuer, but he snatched her out of the fall at the last second. Because he'd been ready for this exact moment, he caught her cleanly and spared her from getting hurt. Vacant tells sopping Vavi, "I got your sister back from the mirror world, that part's done, but she's wrecked right now. She needs a full week to recover, and then she'll be able to live like before again." He shoved the girl into his sobbing brother's arms. Could this nightmare be real? Somewhere inside, he'd already quit hope long ago, and all he could think about was one thing: ripping revenge out of everyone he blamed. Vavi couldn't hold it in. He burst into tears without stopping, drowning in sheer happiness because he'd finally met his dear, beloved older sister, the one he hadn't seen in forever. The adventurers standing on the sidelines were stunned and moved by what they were seeing, because after that, what was he going to pull off next? The magician felt the crushing weight of his choices and dropped to his knees, begging forgiveness for how he'd disrespected the young alchemist, pouring out non-stop gratitude and apologies even though he was over 40. Vakin nodded with satisfaction and flashed a soft, sympathetic smile at Vavi. Beowulf burst into their heartfelt moment and slammed in the news. Tomorrow, they were heading out for the mission he'd teased earlier. A bit later, the adventurers, wiped out from a brutal day, crashed into the Dancing Duck to rest, and Fia was not having it. She puffed her cheeks like a brat, shot a resentful glare, and stared right through him as if she expected him to finally snap and react. Ken tried to tell her that Bayo had dragged him along, but she just snorted, spun away, and wouldn't hear it. How was he supposed to fool her when he'd already promised to meet her at the party tomorrow? One of the adventurers snapped into loud laughter the moment he saw what was happening. He'd never seen Fio like this, and it was obvious she was really into the alchemist. Fio bit her lip with pure embarrassment, but when Zosimo's suggested they call it a day, she couldn't stand the idea of stopping. The very next morning, the adventurers were already out on the street, preparations done, gear set, and ready to charge into the mission. Right when this idol was about to sing, a sharp shout from a man with glasses cut through the air, Gizar, a scientist from the Royal Academy, fuming with rage because an alchemist had joined the expedition, and to him, that was absolutely unforgivable. As Vakin awkwardly scratched his head, Bayo wouldn't let up, pushing the seasoned scientist to trust him and bringing the alchemist along, swearing it would pay off big and that he'd never regret it. Gezar bared his teeth, fury burning in him as he growled that he wouldn't be treated like some stupid, gullible kid. And then he snapped that alchemists were just vulgar pretenders, not true scientists. The captain of the Chirpaniksov swore they wouldn't leave without this guy, because then the scientist could finally hit the road alone. No escort, no company. Zosimo's edged toward his master and poked his head with careful fingers, trying to warn him about the gut-punching premonition that this mission was going to turn deadly. Yet that terrifying feeling was exactly why Ken had decided to tag along with Bayo's team. This was an escort job for Professor Gazar, right to the ossuary tower squatting in the ruins near the Dunatek River basin. Because once the rainy season hits, monsters crawl in by the dozen around that place. Those conditions are way too rough for civilians to explore as a group, but right after the rainy season, the place blooms with plants and even seafood, and the civilian can't help thinking he might stumble on something useful. He pushed hard to convince the scientist that there was nothing to worry about, then swore, again and again, that he'd never mess with his crucial research in the future. Gazar snapped his hand up with pure irritation, like everyone should have known better. No need to spell it out. Some lowly alchemist couldn't possibly meddle with his noble research. The disgruntled scientist snapped, "Time is money, now move." And the alchemist trudged to the cart. Then he let out a breath of relief, and Bayo clapped him on the shoulder before heading after Gazar. At last, the long-awaited journey ignited, and a tight crew of several people charged forward with pure excitement, because so far they've only scratched the surface of the route they planned to conquer. Ken was chatting with his assistant, and it had been forever since they'd rolled around by cart. Teleporting so much had spoiled them. Still, sometimes it felt right to kick back and just relax. Right as the talk hit a stride, Oscar from the Black Dogs burst out of the cart with a grin, greeted Wayne, and practically begged for a shot to team up and spark real, productive cooperation. The man decided to ask Ken straight up if it was cool to keep things so simple and casual, since they both belonged to the same guild, like friends and battle-ready comrades. Oscar's sister, Miss Cal, snapped that he better not slack off, right here at work. But Vavai, the opposite type, waved the alchemist to chill for a moment since he was hanging with the Black Dogs. But Miss Call wasn't wrong. Zosmos shot a message to his master that a group was closing in from the right, and Ken instantly warned the Black Dogs, only for them to ignore it and stay on the road. Minutes later, a swarm of armed bandits closed in on every side of the horse-drawn carriage, striking fast and moving in perfect sync. They demanded something totally standard for their kind, something valuable they could sink their teeth into. Then they backed it up by threatening instant death to every single person in that carriage, no exceptions. The scientist panicked and shoved himself into hiding behind the brave adventurers' backs, while they fumed, clearly furious about the sudden, unexpected run-in. The bandits cackled with pure evil, but the Black Dog team sprang out of the cart in a heartbeat, then snapped into formation, weapons up, ready to crush any threat and guard Gazar. While the scientist panicked, Beale's mind was already firing off battle tactics. He whipped around to Vakin and offered to take out two of them, but the alchemist spiraled into his own thoughts again, flat out ignoring everyone. That guy kept going on, swearing the bandits hadn't changed one bit. 500 years later, they still only robbed and killed, until Ken finally cut him off and snapped his attention to Beowulf. With his face totally blank, Ken finally blurted, "So, is it a crime if I put someone to sleep forever?" Bo was left scratching his head while the bandits, brimming with confidence, cackled and charged the adventurers. Because if you're terrified of punishment, you shouldn't even bother lifting a weapon. Vakin struck out of nowhere. No one saw it coming. Before anyone could even move, he lopped a bandit's head clean off, and blood exploded across the ground. With a grin, the alchemist swore he feared no punishment at all. He only wanted to uncover the real worth of every single life standing there. The bandits went stone still, like the ground had glued their feet there, and Ken, feeling the tension tighten, let out a heavy sigh because of course he'd be stuck handling another mess. He thrust his staff at the bandits and let out a brutal threat. This is their last chance, so pray hard. And if they don't want to die, drop to their knees and beg for forgiveness 100 times. Gazar froze in pure shock. He dropped on his butt, body trembling with terror, and blurted, "What is this all about?" The protagonist gripped his weapon tight, and all around him lay dozens of enemies he'd crushed, motionless, lifeless, and silent. Vakin, still reeling, muttered that he figured he'd rattled the professor a bit. Then he hit him with the question. How many people did he need to bring back to life? And out in the back, the man just kept trembling with terror. Zosimos leaned in and told Vakin they might be able to drag them back to life. Then Vakin snapped that it was just heartbreaking. And under the 30-minute rule, secret potions can revive a person, but only if the corpse is in the right condition. His acquaintances said he stood out again, but he still kept it real and stayed a good guy. He didn't even need their help. When it happened, the main character shot back with an apology and promised them that next time he'd handle it a completely different way. After a bit, their carriage finally lurched forward, and as it rolled through the open plains, Gazar kept shaking with terror, biting down on his lower lip like it might hold him together. The protagonist shot an apology for going way too far, and the other guy snapped back, "Don't sweat it. Aristocrats are always cowards. They never lift a finger. They just lounge in chairs while everyone else does the work." Right then, Zosimos cut them off, whipping around to Vakin, calling him Lord, and declaring that he was done with everything he'd been asked to handle. The main character thanked him, and the assistant brushed it off like it was nothing. Then the enemies snapped back to their senses. Zosimo declared that they should have come to life, and he drove the truth straight into their heads. He didn't think they'd ever turn to a bandit's path. They told him, "Don't say that, because people are people, and once they mess up, they might just do it again." Back then, the hero stared at the madness in his world. People kept launching wars again and again, slaughtering each other with deadly weapons forged by alchemists. Even the bandits came packed with alchemists' weapons, and he'd made the rookie mistake of assuming that would never happen. So he kept forcing the cart forward anyway. He vanished into his thoughts, and a wave of sadness hit his face as he counted every mistake he'd made so far. Right then, the commander snapped his head toward the professor and asked if he got why they brought the Vakin along. He nodded yes. The guy leaned in and warned them, "We've still got a long road ahead, so the professor better brace himself. During the rainy season, the water surges so bad they can't ride a carriage any farther. So they ditch the vehicle and push on by foot. Then they run straight into a giant crab monster, and everyone's going to square up and fight it. Right behind the final enemy, a giant slime will loom in their path. And beyond that, massive water insects will swarm through the dark, making the whole scene feel absolutely terrifying. The second night drops, a pack of skeletons crawls out of the dark. Then they swarm the area, and good luck trying to fight your way through that nightmare. To win, the main character swings his weapon, and a massive energy barrier erupts from it, blasting every enemy out of the way. The professor is left completely stunned. The man got asked again if he was happy they dragged the main character along, and his patience snapped so hard that he muttered that he finally understood just how cool he was, while the other guy shot back that the real disaster was still waiting right around the corner. The rainy season hangs a thick fog over everything, so they don't even try to move yet. They wait for it to clear, then decide to eat, and everyone jumps on board. Gizar snapped that they needed to talk faster, and now, because did they really think he was just randomly in a hurry? They shot back that they were worried about his safety, and the man grinned, saying, "You're adventurers, so figure something out." Another man stepped aside and said the professor looked straight up consumed by his work, so Bacon shot back, "Is research really that important?" They replied, "He's digging into the history of magic," and you could tell by their tone that he was absolutely hooked. After a while, they finally stumbled into a brand new sight, an eerie tower that doubled as an ossuary, and when they saw it, relief hit them hard. because at that moment the protagonist was dead sure these were the ruins of the Tower of the Sages. The team wheeled toward the professor and warned him that monsters could be lurking ahead, so don't charge in, then demanded, "Do you get it?" Gazar snapped back. "What are you saying? I don't have time for this." He had to crack this tower's mystery fast and earn his spot in the academy, so he sprinted straight for the facility. While everyone else just groaned at the chaos he was creating, and Vaken couldn't figure out why he had no time to waste. He was told that this tower vanishes the second the rainy season ends, and nobody can explain why. Vaken just nodded like he'd figured it all out, thinking the Tower of the Sages might still have a few tricks running even then. Is it really this fog choking every corner here? It crawls from the bones and swallows the tower, turning air into bone-thick dread instead of answers, until the protagonist whips around to Zosimo's and says he started moving, and Zosimo snaps back that he's just begun restoring the archive. Bacon assumed these ruins were all that was left of Donate's old water city, where art and tourism once thrived. Now nothing but pitiful wreckage. Shattered walls and fallen pillars where buildings should have stood. A heartbeat later, the protagonist caught the shift in the air. Zosimo spoke up, and Vaken shot back that he could feel it too, before his assistant urged them to retreat right now. The main character said Nushi lived here ages ago, and if he's still hanging around after 500 years, that spells nothing but trouble. Vaken's eyes locked on with terrifying focus, but his nerves were screaming. Staring at the monster in front of him, he knew this was going to be anything but easy. The main characters blared at BO that they had to bail right now, because a colossal monster was coming straight at them. The men demanded, "Is this your premonition again?" And if Bacon was that terrified, they knew it meant real danger was lurking, so he warned them. If they got spotted, it would be bad news for sure. They shouted to Oscar and this Colin's command cut in, "Leave. We're already planning to retreat." The professor erupted into loud shouts about how ridiculous everything they were saying sounded. And then one of the escorts snapped back, asking if he still couldn't see what mattered right now. Bale demanded to know what was wrong with Gizar, and the protagonist shot back to himself that if he was a researcher, he should be able to figure it out. But Zosimo's cut him off, saying there wasn't a moment to waste, because that monster would be here any second. Just like that, the donut death worm burst back up from the ground, blasting the surface into the air as debris scattered everywhere, leaving all his friends staring in stunned horror at the giant monster. Everyone erupted into shouting, swearing they'd never seen creatures like this before. Disgusting. Someone yelled, while the monstrous huge thing wasn't the only nightmare, because little worms crawled out too. Then Bacon snapped that those worms were his kids and warned, "Be careful." And he even warned us. They're all utterly relentless and downright ferocious, and there are over 100 of them, so we've got to break free from this mud and water right now. His friend demanded, "Can we even handle this?" And right then, he shot a call to the professor. The bald man said that Geyser bolted from the monsters, charging straight toward a ruined building that looked downright deadly. And everyone spun toward him, stunned to the core, asking, "What are you doing?" Zosimo's admitted that in a real fight it would have been smarter for him to stay with them, but instead he panicked and ran. Then he knew that was wrong. The protagonist nodded, thinking, "I can't just abandon him to die. My conscience won't let me." Vaken clenched his fist and declared, in no uncertain terms, that he had no choice. Then a voice snapped from behind him, admitting he truly had no choice because he was terrified. Turns out it was his friend, the commander, who grilled him. "So you really want to risk your life for someone who tramples the lives of your escorts?" And he snapped back, "We're leaving right now." So the protagonist snapped that Zosimo's was kinda dry, and Zosimo's fired back that it was a wise call as commander, while Vaken swore he'd take everything on himself. The main character yelled for everyone to sprint to the tower and the ossuary. He was about to unleash dangerous artifacts, and the whole group froze in pure shock. A tiny magic seal blinked into existence in the protagonist's hands, and with a fierce seriousness, he swore he'd figure out what to do with that creature. The commander snapped, asking what he'd do by himself. The other man nodded and said it was impossible, but Vaken pressed his point again, demanding they hear his plan. His acquaintances warned him, "Don't dare die. If it gets too hot, sprint away." Then they barreled through, tearing down the worm's children. Zosimo said Bayo had decided to carve out a retreat route for him, like they'd already locked in as comrades. And the protagonist nodded, saying it looks exactly like that. Vaken snapped his focus onto the monster, challenged him to a face-off, then yanked out a handheld artifact full of explosive missiles and charged straight into the attack. Without wasting a second, he hurled the artifact at his enemy and barked, "Catch it." The hit landed, he confirmed it, and the guy practically exploded with joy, but then something totally unexpected slammed into the scene. The worm starts slurping air like it's gearing up, then lunges at him with wild fury. He didn't see it coming, so he swore up a storm, and that beam was locked dead on his face. The commander and the rest of the crew erupted into shouts for his name, because nobody knew what was happening to him. Through the choking smoke, all they could make out was a lone Viking silhouette. After a few breathless moments, the smoke tore apart like someone yanked away a sheer veil, and there it was. Phania silks, a wafer-thin magical fabric that hardens the instant it hits. Vaken admitted he didn't have much of this stuff, so he had to play it safe. Then he went for a wild gamble and chugged the hero's potion, blasting his physical abilities way higher. Then he hurled the potion bottle over his shoulder without a single glance, pure determination on his face. He declared they were kicking off the battle right now. The main character began to circle the monster, weaving like a blur while it moved insanely fast. The worm then whipped out another beam to strike, but he slipped away at the last second. Then Bacon used his trick, and the worm's body went boom, exploding right in front of them. His friends stared in awe, finally realizing why he'd told them to back off, and the professor immediately shot back. So this is the Alchemist's power. The hero looked at the defense and thought, "No way, this thing can't get through," and sure enough, the damage barely landed. But once he realized he might actually not need to finish the fight, the question hit hard. Did he really have to use it after all? Zosimo's pressed, "How can I help?" And Vaken snapped back that the key was simple: never let the weaklings get anywhere near him. His assistant nodded, and right then his cubic body started to glow. Sparks shot out to the sides and slammed into the worm's children. With the swarm of enemies wiped out, Vaken leaned in and demanded when Zosimo's had learned magic. Then he smirked, saying it was all thanks to him that Zosimo's finally finished training, and he had something special lined up just for him. A tiny dark sphere started to materialize in his hands, and as he kept clutching it, he bolted away from the worm's whipping spikes. Yet one still tore across his face. Rage boiled in his veins as he stewed in silence. Then he snapped and hurled the sphere straight at the worm. Right after that, he declared, "Everything's ready." Vaken didn't blink for even a second. Then, all at once, the world around him erupted into smoke. Moments later, the smoke snapped away, and the whole scene went stone cold, even the monster itself, locked in ice drops. That artifact used the frantic motion of nearby molecules to slam the temperature down to absolute zero. Everyone started bombarding him with questions. How did it all flip in that one heartbeat? Zosimo snapped back that they had to stack a ton of artifacts, but he never expected Vaken to unleash ice drops. The moment the main character shut his eyes, yanked out his weapon, and snapped that nothing could stop them. He knew the enemy meant business, but somehow they fought him down without a single human loss. Vaken hurled his staff like a missile at the worm, boom, and the strike smashed it into a cloud of tiny, flying pieces. Every man went rigid after what he pulled off. Then the broken worm shattered and rained down in even more pieces, and the main character stood right there in the middle of it all. Vaken grinned so hard his face looked red, gripping a magic stone in his hands. Then he insisted that the stone they'd ripped from the worm could be worth way more than his, because right then he was bursting with drive to build something, like the entire world had just exploded into bright, living color. The professor called him by name, and the protagonist whipped around with pure excitement. He yelled that he was alive. The professor just smirked, saying alchemists really could pull off miracles like that. Bacon snapped back that this isn't some better vs worse contest, because as alchemists, they can pull off plenty of miracles too. The professor beamed and told him, "You've opened my eyes," then thanked him like it meant the world, while everyone else froze in total disbelief because nobody saw it coming. Gazar stared at the frozen sculptures and snapped that demon king Talos, who'd mastered every secret of magic, never thought Gazar would actually stand here and witness it. He finally caught the name popping up again, and it hit him like a déjà vu, even though he couldn't place it, because it was buried 500 years ago. Bio snapped his head to Bacon and demanded what they were doing next. Then Bacon shot back asking what Bio was even talking about, and followed it up by asking what to do with the report for the guild. The main character snapped back that everything was falling apart, fully agreeing with Beowulf. Then a never-before-seen monster burst out of nowhere, and the alchemist tore it down on the spot. Bacon figured that once they discovered this, a summons to show up in the royal capital would hit him any day. A fresh day dawned, and once the last fight finally died down, they marched back to the city. Then a voice snapped out, "Hey, got a minute?" And the protagonist spun around without hesitation. The cape-wearing guy claimed they'd been hearing that vacant rumor from every direction, and the other one froze, then snapped, "Who are you?" The cape guy just pressed the question again. Then he flashed a small grin and said, "My name's Tarask," while the other guy just stayed a plain old alchemist. The protagonist braced himself, remembering every brutal run-in he'd had with this guy. Then the guy smirked and claimed he only used mousse and the cheapest ingredients he could find, and the memory hit him so hard it made his skin crawl. Bacon told him, "I got my job because of you," and thanked him for that time. Then Tarask leaned in and said, "Now everybody's talking about you." The guy smirked with devilish confidence and claimed he only wanted to ask questions to their new rising star. Then the main character pressed him hard. "What questions, exactly?" And just like that, Tarask's expression snapped into something colder. Tarask shot his hand out and asked him how he saw the world. And when those words hit, Bacon froze, completely lost for what to say. The protagonist said he had no clue what the question even meant. And then Tarask leaned in and said he was just dying to hear what the alchemist thought. Bacon just couldn't shake the hurt, watching alchemists like him get treated so badly. That old alchemy culture was dead, magic was exploding everywhere, and yeah, as an alchemist, he definitely didn't like it one bit. But the main character can't stand the way he stares, and the fact that he's crowding him only makes it worse. Then Bacon started shaking his hands in front of him, swearing he wasn't really that different from him, just fighting as hard as he could, while Tarask stared at him, genuinely stunned by what he just said. Then the guy pushed, asking if he truly meant he had no complaints, and the main character nodded hard, declaring that everything was fine. Tarask grinned at him sweetly, but inside his head he just thought, "I still haven't broken him yet." Out loud, he smiled and said the alchemists only ever do one thing. Then the guy shot back, asking what he meant. He gave a small, steady smile and calmly told him, "With alchemy, we're building a better future." Then Bacon beamed at Tarask and asked, "You feel the same?" And right after, he hammered home that every alchemist is driving toward the same goal. Hearing that, he blushed so hard he couldn't even form words at first. Then the guy grinned, said the vacant part was spot on, and promised that everything matched perfectly, because they'd all been working like crazy to build a brighter future. Tarask spun to walk away, told Bacon he'd had a dream, and promised that one day he'd finally share it with him. Bacon threw him a quick thank you for the talk, and Zosimo's looked straight through him like, "So what are you gonna tell me?" But the truth hit Bacon hard. He had absolutely no clue. He still couldn't shake the feeling. This guy reminded him of his old alchemist friends. The assistant nodded and said he was a bit vacant, radiating pure eccentric energy, but the other guy snapped back, "Hey, that's rude, we're not even in the same league." After a while, the main character stared down at an envelope cradled in his hands. Then his face lit up with shock, and he blurted, "Wait, did I really get an invitation?" Sweet Shirley and the guild backed him up. then snapped that this invitation came straight from His Majesty and from the Royal Academy of Sciences. The main character just stared with a cold, unimpressed face, shrugged off the whole thing, and demanded she throw it away, only for the girl to snap back that it was impossible. She kept talking, insisting you can't turn down the king's invitation. Then he shot back, "I'm just some small-time adventurer. I don't get what you want from me." Shirley shot back that she didn't believe a tiny nobody adventurer could take down a legendary monster that hadn't shown its face since the country was founded. That's why he got the invitation. Vacant simply sighed. Right then, he was boxed in by other adventurers, all buzzing like, "Yeah, we heard you really pulled off another crazy feat. People say you even got invited to the capital." And they treated meeting the king like the ultimate golden ticket. Zosimo's said it all looked exactly like the professor had described him back in the capital. Then Bacon snapped, recognized his face, and immediately nodded along with his assistant. Then he spun back to Shirley and bluntly told her he wasn't interested in going to the capital, so could he just decline the offer? She shot back that he couldn't, and said they'd cover his carriage and hotel there. She told him too, "If you keep talking, we'll put you in a carriage with iron bars." And Bacon snapped back, "That's exactly how criminals get hauled around." He finally got it, arguing wouldn't change a thing. Then he pressed Shirley again. Was that invitation still open to whoever came with him? She nodded and said the stay would be covered for anyone he brought, and even bodyguards could be paid for. After a while, the protagonist burst out into the city, eyes locked in deep thought. Zosimo's immediately pounced and demanded what he was planning. Bacon grinned and promised he'd use this opening to take Theo on a trip, because just recently, he'd broken his own promise to show up at that party. Zosimo's admitted it was insanely tricky, and the main character cut in, "There's one problem." The assistant snapped his gaze to him like, "Wait, what now?" The protagonist admitted he'd never taken a girl on an adventure before. Then Zosimo's blurted, "So you're a virgin?" Vakin shrugged it off and snapped, "I've got an idea." He laid out his flawless plan to his assistant. 6 steps to get that girl to take a trip with him, starting with one move. Set the mood just right, and Bacon practically couldn't contain his excitement. They figured all of this would feel totally normal, like nothing strange could possibly happen, and honestly, they called it the perfect plan. After a while, the protagonist finally reached Theo. She lit up with that sweet smile, called his name, and was about to celebrate his return, but her words cut off mid-sentence. Vakin lunged up to her, grabbed her shoulders, and blurted that they had to hit the road together, right now. The girl froze at his words, then just stared and asked again. After a while, the main character snapped, screaming, clutching his head and hurling curses because his flawless plan just collapsed. Zosimo's backed him up and admitted, "A total failure." Theo stood there, totally stunned, not understanding a thing. After a few days, they finally kicked off their journey side by side, and the girl lit up with pure joy. She called to him, telling him there was a hot spring waiting in the next town. With a bright smile, the main character asked if it was truly that simple. Then he cut it off and insisted they grab some supplies for alchemy right away. Zosimo's snapped his head toward him and said they were somehow actually enjoying the trip to the capital. Then the other guy shot back that he really was glad, and that's when he remembered Theo's reaction and what her father did. Vakin said Edgar had given him his blessing, so gratitude surged through him, and then he added, "Hey, maybe you should thank the king too for welcoming this invitation." The protagonist let out a shaky breath. Zosimo's warned him that an invite from King Celery, all the way back 500 years ago, would have been a total disaster. Vakin snapped back to the past the second the moment hit him. When he'd first been invited to meet the king of his time, pride had surged straight through him. In the end, it all boiled down to money and politics, and the king turned out to be a total bore. His alchemy plans just managed to mess with him and nothing more. The aristocrats surrounding him were all cut from the same cloth, viewing alchemy as nothing but a tool to line their pockets with dirty, selfish gains. The protagonist suddenly remembered every emotion. Right then, disgust hit like a punch, and to this day he still remembers it crystal clear. Right then Theo snapped his attention, asking if he was actually listening. Then she fired back, "The hot springs of beauty. Yeah, these are the hot springs of beauty." He shot back, "Yeah, of course I listened to you." And the girl grinned as she leaned in, saying, "The moment you get lower, everything looks even better. And if she plunges in there, she'll pull in tons of clients." With a grin plastered on his face, the main character stared ahead and said, "Theo is already super cute." And the moment it left his mouth, the girl went wide-eyed in shock. Wyken couldn't stop thinking about it. Women chase beauty like it's instinct. So 500 years ago, when everyone was ordering beauty serums and potions, he wondered if he should make some for Theo, and right then, Theo went bright red with pure embarrassment. The protagonist leaned in and asked if she was seasick, then frowned and said it was weird, because the potion he'd made for her was supposed to stay effective for another full day. Theo flashed a smile and told him she was totally fine. Then her heart nearly exploded when he complimented her, and he straight up said that if she wanted more potions, he could hand some over in about 30 minutes. But he warned her not to push it. Zosimo's shot up to the girl and told her to forgive her master's boneheaded insensitivity. Then she burst into laughter and said it was still just like Ken. The assistant swooped closer to the main character and told her she needed to understand. He wouldn't just start showering a girl with compliments in a brand new place like that. The main character slammed down his words and swore he was speaking pure truth. And yeah, Theo is seriously adorable, the kind who could totally land a modeling career. Then Zosimo's pressed him on what cute even meant, and the guy snapped back that he had no real checklist for what counts as female beauty. The only things that truly matter to him are that expressive face, those cherry red lips, that soft, gentle gaze, those deep brown eyes, and hair that shines like sunbeams. The protagonist's got way more to say, but what he actually likes might totally depend on you, not him. Especially since it's Theo we're talking about, and yeah, she could be a little biased. Vykin admitted he couldn't stop staring at her, so there was no way he could judge her fairly. Then he scratched his chin, a soft grin spreading across his face, and said, "If I call Theo cute, then she's cute." The protagonist kept wrestling with that question, taking it dead seriously. Then Theo cut in, blushing hard with embarrassment, and said she might not keep going. Vykin stared at her without even turning his head. At first she stayed still, then she suddenly covered her face with both hands, and he flicked his eyes back to the road ahead. Then it hit him. He'd spilled all that right in front of Theo. At that exact moment, Zosimo's thanked him for the full explanation, and the guy instantly flushed and started bumbling through excuses to cover himself. The girl stared at him, hurt flashing across her face, and demanded, "Did you really lie to me?" He froze in shock. Then Bacon spun away from her and flat out said no, claiming it was too brutally honest. So he begged her to erase half of it, but she snapped back, "I'm not doing that." She clasped her hands in front of her face, cheeks burning, and blurted out that she was genuinely relieved. He finally let her in on what he was feeling. The protagonist stayed totally lost, and a week dragged by, until Zosimo's finally told him they'd reach the capital soon, so it was time to get ready. They finally rolled into Juri's royal capital, and Theo gasped. This place was glowing from every corner. She practically begged to soak it all in and hit the shops right away. Then the parent snapped the question, "And what about the king?" Then Vykin snatched her hand, beamed like everything was fine, and promised he wouldn't rush into politics at all. While the king barely even had a moment to meet some alchemist. Theo tried to talk him down, insisting this was an audience with the king, but he brushed her off like it didn't matter. Then the guard snapped his attention and called him by name, demanding, "What's your name?" The ma'am smiled at him, said they'd walk him through because His Majesty was already waiting, and that news only made Vykin bristle, while Theo just gave him a hopeful, "Good luck." After a grueling stretch, they finally burst through the castle gates. Then the main character was escorted straight into the hall, where King Janus III of Juri and all his subordinates were already waiting. Vykin greeted him and said he'd shown up the moment his work was done. then leaned in and introduced himself like it was a title. An alchemist, vacant ored. So one of the guys with glasses snapped that it was rude to speak up without permission, and the empty-minded one realized, finally, that introducing yourself was basic manners. Then he blurted an apology and asked, out loud, to start over. Then the king locked eyes on him and demanded, point blank, "So it's true you wiped out that legendary monster like it was nothing?" Vacant fired back, "No way." In his head he scoffed. This so-called monster wasn't legendary at all, just a regular one that shows up when a specific pattern hits. Then the king snapped, asking if it was just a rumor. And the main character swallowed hard, saying he was stuck in a far-off village and had no clue what anyone was even talking about back in the city. Right here, one of the king's own men blurted out, "What kind of disrespect is this?" Because in front of the king, he wouldn't even kneel, and he answered back with a smug, arrogant grin. Vacant couldn't shake the feeling that etiquette had changed again, so he admitted, straight up, that he came from the village and didn't really know the rules. If they'd warned him ahead of time, he would have prepared. Just moments later, the main character crumpled to his knees on the floor, asked, trembling, if everything was okay now. Then his subordinates stared at him in pure shock as the guy demanded, "So what do you want from me?" Vacant leaned in and told him, "Got any requests? Go straight to the Adventurers Guild." Then he made it clear, they'd decide exactly what he'd get paid for his help. The king leaned in and said he'd heard the hero brewed and sold magic potions, then demanded to know what the hero could make. So the hero grinned, promised he could craft plenty, and shot back, "What exactly do you need?" Vacant shot a look up at the king. Then the king stared right back, and right there, the guy blurted out if he might need a potion for hair loss. The king exploded with rage at those words, and just like that, the main character was thrown into prison. Now he's stuck behind bars. Zosimo snapped that everything was a total disaster, and he was begging for his master to be executed fast. Vacant shot back, "I'm not rushing to die, I'm just Krento-oriented." And the moment he spoke, Zosimo's finally understood exactly why people were freaking out. The protagonist asked the assistant if he'd come back to get him the potion, and the assistant said it should be about 3 days. Though there was no guarantee he'd ever be freed. Vacant snapped that he wouldn't stay there and urged them to leave. So Zosimo's demanded how he was supposed to get out, and Vacant asked whether a quick transfer might work, only for Zosimo's to shut it down immediately. The assistant promised they could kick up a storm since he was about to escape prison, but Vacant snapped that it would do little good, then urged a brighter approach, right as a glowing object flared to life in his hands. The main character promised to brew a potion to save the king's hair, and said he'd definitely get forgiven. Then Zosimo snapped back, calling it a surprisingly mature move, because he figured the guy wanted to wipe everyone out and bolt, and that comment lit the other guy up with outrage. Vacant blurted that it wasn't only his hair messing with him. He felt completely worn out, and Zosimo shot back that in this primitive age there aren't any artificial fairies. So yeah, that was exactly why he was running on empty. The main character told him that back in their era, everyone had their own artificial fairy, and the assistant nodded along, insisting that people's lives were better because of it. Then the Vacant offered to conjure an artificial fairy for the king. Zosimo snapped back, "Isn't that just way too much?" But he trusted the potion would be enough, and the guy agreed, then dove straight into the creation process. First, the main character shut his eyes and clasped his hands right in front of his face, then snapped them open and demanded that everything be cooked. After a while, the potion finally brewed to perfection. Zosimo's couldn't hide the joy, calling it exactly what he'd expect from a true master. Then he teased, asking if Zosimo's meant that as praise or a jab. Zosimo's just grinned and said he still needed to craft a couple of artifacts. Right then, a soldier strode past, and when he saw the main character casting magic, he stopped cold and demanded, "What are you doing?" The man demanded, "What is this thing and where'd you get it?" And the boy shot back that he wanted to make the king smile, an apology gift, and pleaded for help passing it along. Then the soldier snapped, "Yeah, but how did you even open the door?" Vacant sneered that the lock was so crude any monkey could crack it, poured liquid metal into it, and click, nothing held. Then he turned to the soldier and demanded, "So you'll take me to the king, right?" Then the man snapped his weapon up and barked that stopping him was his duty. And the protagonist shot back that, yeah, he figured. At that exact moment, Bacon hucked one of his artifacts straight onto the soldier's body, then slammed the activation button and tore the scene wide open. At first, the man had zero clue what was going on. Some weird, unclear stuff sprayed onto his gear, and then his armor started to rot and oxidize right in front of him. A few seconds later, it was like his body peeled off its disguise, skin bare, and he stared in shock, blurting, "What is this?" The protagonist didn't react at all. He spun toward Zosmos and said, "With this, we'll reach the king in no time." Zosmos' assistant then blurted, "Is that really the only reason you got this artifact?" They called it mucus preparation number 18. And 500 years ago, this stuff was all the rage. The second you toss it, the slime explodes into clones and starts multiplying right away, melting only the outer clothes to leave your target fully exposed. Then it pricks the right pressure points to make things spiral. People were pulling pranks with it, and before long, we had to figure out how to control when and how it got used. The injured soldier snapped again, yelling, "What is this?" and then demanded, "Get it off me right now." The main character snapped his gaze on him and swore, "Nah, I'm not dying here, so stop panicking," because all he'd leave behind was his clothes and armor. Zosimo snapped that if they had artificial fairies, they'd free them in seconds, but they don't, and Vacant told him to stop stalling and just move on. The main character trudged through the castle corridors, and then bam, a squad of soldiers spilled out in front of him, shouting that they'd finally found him and urgently needed to call for help. After a while, Vacant found himself boxed in. Soldiers surrounded him, tightened into a hard circle, and leveled their weapons at his face, and he couldn't help but stare in shock. Zosimos asked what they were going to do, fight, and he shot back that there was no need because he'd cooked up a stacked pile of slime with plenty in reserve, certain he'd never sneak past unnoticed. The main character stayed cool and still, until a squad of soldiers lunged at him, and in one ruthless move, he yanked out multiple vials of mucus number 18 and hurled them straight at their faces. At first, the soldiers brushed it off, but when Vacant activated the potions, a burst of magic wrapped around the men's armor, leaving them stunned. Piece by piece, the armor and clothes started to melt away, and they blurted, "What is this?" The men kept groaning and blurting out nonsense until they finally noticed the slime was melting their clothes, and they shouted, "What is happening?" Right then and there, creepy sounds kept pouring through the castle corridor, and not a single soul so much as flinched. Soon enough, every man dropped to the ground, prostrate at the protagonist's feet, and he barely even spared them a glance. Suddenly, Bacon scratched his cheek, and nerves hit him hard. He muttered that things looked kinda off, and the assistant nodded right along. Then the main character spun around and snapped that he didn't want to stare at wet men, and Zosimos swore it proved once more that he had no heart, because the guy just grinned and called it the greatest of all illegal artifacts. The assistant said that if that was the case, he could just grab an artifact that changes his appearance, and Viking admitted he never even thought of it, right when a girl lunged at him, and he barely scraped by with his life. That stranger swung at him again and again, but he blocked every single hit, shutting Yui's attack down, then dropped hard onto the floor. She told herself she was fast, wildly different from the other guards, so she must be the kind of strength that matters. Then the girl finally said she'd found him and called his name. The stranger gripped a sword in both hands and declared she'd just gotten official orders to execute him, so he better brace himself. He shoved his hands up in front of him, froze for a second, then blurted, "I haven't hurt a single person yet." The girl didn't even blink. She just shifted her stance a little and told him, straight up, to get ready to die. Turns out she was Princess Guardian Maya Fonte, and Vacant blurted out, begging her to hear him out, insisting he wasn't out to cause trouble. He just wanted to speak to the king. But before he could finish one word, she exploded forward and attacked him with pure fury. And somehow, he slipped the blow at the very last second. Maya snapped that she wouldn't let him anywhere near the king, and Bacon scrambled to explain, "I've got medicine for him." But Maya shot back, "So you really plan to poison him, you villain." The protagonist snapped out of the next attack, dropped into bent legs, and then, without hesitation, declared that she was one of those who never listens. Bacon tried to talk her down and swear he only wanted the king to enjoy life, but she snapped back that he was clearly peddling illegal substances. Then he blurted again, stunned. Maya Fanti said he was dodging her attacks, proving he wasn't some easy target. Then he shrugged and told her he was just an ordinary alchemist. Zosimos asked if he should use the artifacts, and he snapped back that he could manage without them for now. The assistant pressed, "Why, she's fighting for real." Bacon nodded, agreed, then hesitated like something in his gut didn't want to explain. The main character started by warning her. If he went in for real, she'd feel humiliated, and there was no way she'd shake off that defeat so easily. He also said he wouldn't use force, because how would that even look to the king? Maya clearly hated the idea. She kept insisting, "I'm a girl, and you couldn't possibly treat her like she was the weaker sex." Her rage simmered so hard she could barely grind her teeth. Rage finally snapped. She screamed at him that he was a terrible person, then pressed, "Did you really underestimate me?" Maya was left totally stunned that she'd actually heard him. Then her screams erupted. She swore she'd execute him and cut his head off. While he figured this was it, she'd never listen to a word from him now. At that moment, the girl shot forward and slammed him with a brutal hit. And even though he was worn out, he was still standing strong. Maya froze, sure she'd landed the full force of her attack. Yet he didn't go down. Zosimos said he had to grab a weapon, and the other guy shot back, "Relax, I'm defending myself, not attacking." But the assistant just stared, calling it a weird rule. Zosimos insisted he had to defend himself, so maybe it was finally time to unleash the rest of the artifacts. But the other guy snapped back that he wanted to dodge any more fighting, and Zosimos immediately thought he could use this opening. In his head, he was already picturing how that potion would wreck Maya, and his face flushed red at the thought. Right then, his assistant snapped, saying he could tell he was thinking something nasty. He shot back, "Shut up, there's nothing wrong with it." While he was trading words with Zosimos, the girl struck at him again, and warned that during the fight, you can't afford distractions. He barely slipped out at the absolute last second. Somehow she knocked him off balance and he crashed down. She snapped, "I've got him." But as he fell, the vial of potion still burst through the air at her, and even though she slashed it, the potion still managed to hit its mark. After a few heartbeats, her armor started melting away, taking her clothes with it. She froze in terror and blurted, "What is happening?" When the picture popped up in front of him, the protagonist snapped and cursed under his breath, and Zosimos basically threw it back with sarcasm. Yeah, of course this wasn't what he wanted. Maya Fanti kept getting battered by everything, her clothes nearly gone, yet she teased that it was a pretty lusty situation. Then shot him a grin and asked if he honestly thought he could beat her that way. The main guy insisted he wouldn't take her down, and before he could blink, she smashed the test tube herself. Then snapped, "Shut up," charged straight at him, and right in the middle of the rush, something hit her. Bacon warned her not to twitch too much. Then she snapped at him to shut up, because even his words wouldn't stop her. But with every step, unease clawed at her, until he snapped that it was only because she kept moving so much. If she finally calmed down, she'd feel better, and the other guards would too. Maya Fanti just said, "Now I finally get where all the guards disappeared to." Then she leaned in and warned, "Don't underestimate me. I'm a princess guardian." The girl tested new tricks and daring moves until she found what worked, and she swore that come what may, she'd guard the king's life to the very end. Even her strength finally started to crumble. Zosima said it was wild that most people can't resist the slime, and the main character nodded, because yeah, she was tough as nails. At that exact moment, Bacon snapped that even someone like her had a breaking point. Then he closed the distance toward her. Then he tapped her lightly on the forehead, and her eyes shot wide open like crazy, because that mucus had turned her nerves up to max. The main character admitted that no matter how hard she fought to restrain herself, her entire body had already become easy prey for anything outside her. Zosimo's told him he was a total devil, and the guy shot back that he could stare at her a little longer. Then the assistant went quiet for a beat and asked if he should really spill this to Fio. When the main character heard her name, he instantly snapped back, froze dead in his tracks. Bacon snapped at Zosimo's to get out of here, and Zosimo's fired back that he got over 60 words in his dictionary to describe exactly how he feels right now, only for the guy to beg him, "Don't say a word." After a while, they broke out of the castle. The main character couldn't believe it. "We got out that easily." And the assistant shot back, "If this place was built to face a real monster's attacks, it would have held." Zosimo said the royal guard captain, and even the prime minister, were still squirming with pleasure. At this point, the protagonist said, "At least I got the potion to the king, and I already shut down the slime drug's activation code." Like that meant everything was finally safe. Then Bacon snapped that it was time to head back to Fio because they were already late, and the assistant shot back that he'd always been great at dodging responsibility. After a while, they finally rolled up to the Hotel Tuesday. Fio lit up with a grin, welcomed them in, and fired off. "So, how'd everything go?" He flashed her a sweet smile and told her, "Yeah, everything went perfectly, no problems at all." Then she asked, "So how are things in the castle?" And he fell into deep thought, replaying every single event that had happened. Then he snapped out of it, rubbing at his face like the nerves were eating him alive. He admitted he was freaking out, so he couldn't remember everything clearly. She squinted at the king like, "Why do you look so royal?" Then burst out laughing and asked, "So what's weird about that?" Bacon snapped the conversation away from everything and said they should go shopping instead, then rushed to apologize for keeping her waiting, only for her to tell him to rest a bit, because he looked completely wiped out. He flashed her a warm smile and told her everything was okay, because if he was by her side, the fatigue would vanish, and the girl instantly blushed all over again. Her face flushed crimson, and her whole body started to shake, while the vacant look on her face screamed she had no idea what was going on. Then Zosimo said, "Good." After that, they finally burst outside, and Theo asked if they should hit a restaurant. He shrugged it off like it was just a personal idea they should decide to follow. A bright smile blossomed across her face. Then she suggested they hit the seafood and vegetable spot, Bistro Aichai. Bacon lit up and agreed, and next thing you know, their hands were clasped together. The guy's cheeks flared with heat and Theo burst into giggles. Then he demanded, "What are you doing?" While she answered, "It's weird, you know, you yelled at me the first time we met." Veka nodded along, and when she said she'd clocked him too, his past came rushing back, everything from their very first meeting flooding into his head. The main character said that even though it hadn't been long at all, it felt like they'd been together forever, and he burst into a giggle. The girl shut her eyes and nodded, agreeing just as hard, like she felt the exact same thing. After a while, they burst back to the hotel, and when evening hit, the protagonist sank into the room and stared hard at the diagram. Zosimo snapped that writing on paper was ancient and outdated. Then he grilled Vaken, "Did you forget your artificial fairy?" Vaken shot back that paper was just easier to work with when designing it. The main character grinned and told Theo he was crafting an artificial fairy named Alina, and that bright smile said he couldn't wait to bring her to life. The support artifact is an artificial fairy, an incredible tool that turbocharges people's lives every single day. But Zosima, built by Vaken, was made for a totally different mission, and she carries her own artificial intelligence. And if the need hits, those other artificial fairies can light up with feelings, think on their feet, and start speaking. Zosimo's heard his speech, nodded like he got every word, and then, yep, turned out to be his younger sister. Right after that, the main character leaned in and asked if that really made him happy. His assistant admitted this was no simple question, and he pressed him. So what do I call this mix of pure dread and wild joy? He chewed on his question for a while, then finally leaned in and said, maybe this is what people call arousal. Then Zosimo's claimed he understood it all, but it felt like he was only smiling because he thought it was possible. Still, he insisted he'd need advanced alchemical gear, and Vaken shot back that since the towers of the sages were still standing, the tools were there. Feel swooped in on the main character, hooked her hands on his shoulders, and demanded to know what he was up to. Then, he gently clamped his grip on her wrists and pulled her close. He leaned in and hissed that it was a secret. No way he'd spoil the surprise, and the girl shot back that it was already ruined. Then Vaken swore it would stay a surprise because she'd be waiting on pins and needles. A fresh day ripped into the sky, sunlight blazed through the window, and inside the hotel, a cheerful buzz spilled out from one room. The main character snapped awake, rubbed his head, and demanded who was hammering on his room door. Then the voice told him it was the hotel owner, Chu S1. Vaken swung the door open, told the man someone wanted to see him, and then asked for a minute only for the man to fire back. Who could it be? The man snapped that the visitor was a girl from the Imperial Guard, Maya Fanti, and Vaken exploded with rage the moment he heard her name. With an awkward grin plastered on his face, the main character closed in, called her by name, and asked if she truly needed anything. When he spoke, the girl twisted into a disgusted look, clear as day that she didn't want to see him at all, and then she snapped his name like it burned. He grinned at her and declared that the Alchemist's motto is, "Let's make the world a better place." Then he leaned in and said he was one of them, and that his name was Vaken Ord. Maya stared at him in stunned disbelief, her face screaming pure exhaustion from everything that had just happened. Then the guy just laughed, and Zosimo said he reminded him of some pseudo-religious guru. The girl just gave up with a heavy sigh and blurted that the king was calling him again, because the words hit him like a punch, and he went wide-eyed in shock. The main character bluntly refused, saying he had to be out the next morning, and Maya snapped back in outrage. This is a challenge from the king himself. Then Vaken said it was time for him to head back. There was nothing left for him here, only for the girl to fire back that this whole thing was a challenge sent straight by the king. She knew it. She wasn't going to listen to him at all, so he muttered that he was just a careless guy, and if he dared speak again, they'd toss him back in prison. The girl snapped back to how he'd treated her, and her face exploded red with heat. She blurted that she didn't want to come here either, but she still had to drag him to the castle. Then Maefonti announced that thanks to the potion the hero brewed for the king finally decided to swallow his confession and bury what he'd done in the castle. Vaken waved it off like the potion didn't need any big ritual, just a simple thank you if you insisted. Then the girl shot him down and told him to show up at the castle tomorrow morning. The main character called it pure tyranny, seethed at everyone on top, and announced out loud that he was coming. Maefonti spun to leave the room, but Arna stopped him cold. "They're expecting you tomorrow. You've got to come." The main character figured he'd caused them nothing but trouble, and now they were summoning him again. His assistant said he got exactly how he felt. Then Vakenha pulled a goofy face and grinned, swearing that next time he busted out of prison, he'd go all out and hold nothing back. Right here, the main character suddenly got hit with a wild thought. He wondered if everyone around him was just strange, and the way he treated them reeled him in fast. Bacon flashed a sly grin and called it great news. This time, he was already setting aside 3,000 in advance. His face flushed crimson. He even stuck out his tongue like a tease. Then he smirked and swore that Maya Fanti would get hit with the worst of it. Zosimo's claimed drool was pouring out of his mouth, and the other guy gasped in shock, asking if he was really that horrible. Right then, the protagonist watched Maya Fanti drop to her knees out of nowhere, her whole body trembling. She whipped her tear-filled face toward him and snarled that she'd kill him, and he let out a low, furious curse under his breath. A brand new day crashes in, and just like he promised, the main character strides straight up to the king's castle, where the place is packed with even more people than before. Vaken and the king locked eyes, but neither of them dared to speak. Everything went silent, and the others froze right along with them. Then the king snapped that first he didn't need to worry, because nobody would grill him about what he'd done yesterday. The guy was stunned. Then the protagonist shot him a grateful nod, and the guy with the glasses leaned in and said they had to talk about the potion, plus the gratitude and a reward inside an envelope. The king barreled into their conversation and declared that they'd get serious about the future. Then the protagonist's jaw dropped in shock. The man said that ever since the last incident, they'd figured out he was a real-deal alchemist, and if he'd been a spy for some other country, our nation would have been wiped out that very day. In his head, he realized he'd never once even considered it. Then he blurted out, "Wait, that could actually be possible." The man with glasses clocked it instantly. He hammered the words home, and then made it clear they'd take it all into account. Then he shot his fingers at Vaken and declared they'd invited him to work in the castle. So the protagonist blurted out the question right away. The man with the glasses declared that he'd personally oversee the birth of alchemy in their country, all in the name of His Majesty the King. And the moment the words hit, everyone in the room erupted into joyous applause. So the main character shot back, asking what to do if he didn't want to, and everyone around them just froze, mouths hanging open. At that exact moment, the guards closed in around him again, spears thrust forward, itching to strike. Then they shouted his name once more. The guy with glasses warned that the main character is insanely powerful and downright dangerous, and that they can't let him slip into anyone else's hands. The guy insisted they had to get everything perfect for that reason, and then Bacon fired back, asking if they honestly thought he could be controlled, because that question completely threw him. He told them loud and clear that they needed his alchemy, like right now, and he swore that if he hadn't torn himself out of prison, nobody would have even bothered to listen. The man in glasses shot back, "For this exact reason, we want to lock in alchemy, create a whole government that runs on law, not chaos." The protagonist snapped that they shouldn't lie, and then pointed out there weren't any laws in this country to rein in alchemy, alchemists, or even the sale and distribution of potions people brewed themselves. The man looked jittery as he blurted that they had no expert, and then Bacon leaned in and said, in no uncertain terms, that they needed him to forge the law he believed was essential. Right after that, the main character flat out said he can't even talk with them. He shows respect, but draws the line and refuses to join in. Right then, one of the king's confidants burst in from the side, whipped a spear toward him, and demanded, did he seriously not understand a thing? The soldier kept insisting he couldn't just ignore the king, then turned to Vaken and asked, should I cut off his head right here, right now? Like, artifacts or not, no power could stop the sheer number of blades he had lined up to do the job. With all those people out there, the main character snapped that none of them could stop him, straight up, and the soldier nearly choked on his own surprise. Then Vaken marched straight up to the king and demanded, face to face, whether that soldier was following his orders. So hard the king nearly choked on the shock. Then the king's nerves started screaming. He snapped around to the main character and ordered him to wait, while his soldier's hot temper burned like a fuse. But the soldier shoved those warnings aside and snapped that he wouldn't endure another second. This man was poison to the kingdom, and the evil had to be wiped out for good. The main character warned him. If that man refused to listen and still planned to kill him, then he'd have no choice but to treat him like a full-blown villain. Vaken leaned in and snapped that the soldier was way angrier than him. Then his own words lit a fire in the soldier, turning his fury up to max. The man snapped at the protagonist that he was a bad person, then slashed a weapon at him, right as the guy hit the activation again. Right on this soldier's body, a slime suddenly crawled in, and it started melting his clothes and armor to nothing, while the poor man stood there totally clueless, watching it happen like a nightmare he couldn't explain. The protagonist flat out said it was a mucus number 18 drug, and told him not to panic. Sure, it would pin that soldier and freeze him for a while, but the soldier probably already figured that out himself. The soldier stared in shock, and one of them snapped in rage that he'd started doing it again. While that happened, the first soldier's clothes started vanishing almost entirely off his body, and all he could do was rasp out weird sounds that left the other guards totally baffled. He jerked himself up off his knees, shut his eyes, and in a steady voice declared that they were no better than bandits, deciding everything with nothing but bad moves. Vaken spun on his heel, declared their talk was done, and started to leave. Then the king lunged forward, shouting his name to halt him. He didn't even flinch or look back at the sound of his voice. He just barked at the man to take control of the people around him. And he even said alchemy doesn't just create things. It pulls people toward a brighter, happier future, and it must never be twisted for selfish use. The king's words hit him like fear, yet it felt like he'd finally figured something out. So Zosimo's asked whether he could pry the drug out of the guard commander Gertie, and Vaken snapped back that he just needed her to rest a bit longer, because she wasn't dying. A week later, they blasted back home and rushed straight to the Dancing Duck Inn. Fio grinned and told her father, "We're home." The man rushed right up to them, flashed a warm smile, and then leaned in to ask how their trip went. Fio grinned and said this was a blast. They snagged a mountain of souvenirs, and the man insisted on showing them off. Then Vaken cut in, asking how he even got here without his daughter, and the man shrugged. "China helped me." The final girl stepped up to greet him, and it was that same girl trapped inside the mirror dimension. Right away, the protagonist flashed back to every time he saved her, and he blurted out that he was so relieved she was healthy and safe. The girl beamed at him and thanked him, then bragged that she was already feeling as fit as a fiddle, so Bacon just smiled back, saying he was thrilled for her. Fio thanked the girl for helping her dad, and China waved it off. There was no need to thank anyone. They just arrived, so it was time to rest. Fio swore she'd never turn down an offer like that, then grabbed the protagonist's hand and said, "Come on, we're going upstairs for tea." Here, Bacon and the girl snapped to it. Right then, Dad's staring at them like something's off. He demands to know what happened, whether they've really gotten that close, and how they even pulled it off in the first place. Fio spun around and insisted he'd totally imagined it, and before anyone could blink, China stepped in and said it made perfect sense. They'd just come back from a trip. The man nodded along, empty-eyed, and let out a hollow exhale. He shot up on the spot, lunged toward the main character, and promised that when they drank together, he'd spill everything, leaving the guy absolutely stunned. Red flooded his face, tension snapping through him like a wire, and he realized the only escape left was to give in and agree. After a while, Bacon and that man ended up in a bar, staring at glasses piled in front of them. While his dad chatted, the guy couldn't stop thinking he'd feel awful again the next morning. Next morning, the hero was wrecked, hungover, heavy-eyed, clutching his pounding head as his face went paper-white. The artificial village hit him with the reminder that the owner drank 3 times over the limit, and the young man just nodded, saying he remembered it. He didn't regret it one bit, because that night of drinking with Edgar was totally worth it. He finally got to share real laughs with him, and the system still couldn't wrap its head around why people chase fleeting pleasure over health. Ken jabbed a finger at the bottle crates and said he'd actually carved out time for both fun and work. He'd built crate after crate of the potion. The fairy shot him a look and snapped that even drunk, the alchemist could still whip up magical drinks. Then the hero laughed and said, "I've been tinkering in the workshop too," because right after this, he'd be brewing even more. Maya suddenly stepped out in front of him, and the moment she showed up, she slid in a request straight to the poor guy. One look at her, and he understood exactly what the princess on one knee wanted from him, so he blurted, "Why are you here in a place this remote?" Ken spotted the royal figure on his knees and snapped, "Asterisk, that's how a proper bow is done, and everything he'd done before was wrong." The girl then called out to Ord with full formality. Maya blurted that the king himself had ordered her to serve the hero, and the young man, caught completely off guard, shot back that nobody told him a thing. So the girl yanked out the letter and the boy tore it open in a hurry. He found out the king was ready to apologize for his arrogant ignorance, and to prove he meant it, He ordered his own daughter to be sent to Ken. His Majesty penned this. Maya is an outstanding knight, and since she's well-trained, she'll be a real asset to him. Jean then added that he hoped Ken would someday learn to love jewelry, and with that, the letter ended. After he finished reading, the young man had to swallow his pride and beg the princess to go home. Maya was furious, but he insisted he wanted nothing to do with the royal family, and she snapped back that she couldn't go back to the castle. She bluntly confessed she'd been ordered to snag the hero with seduction, and the young man shot back that she shouldn't always lay it all out like that. Then he started to walk away, and she desperately tried to block his exit. She snapped that Ken couldn't just ditch her in that state. Then the princess jabbed at what he'd done, because now everyone would shun her and no one would ever marry her. He snapped back to the moment he'd launched slime at Maya, wrapping her up tight and shutting down her movement. Then he apologized, because the king had already called her his daughter. The guy leaned in and asked if Maya was royal, and she fired back that she was a concubine's daughter. So yeah, half the palace never bought into her. She said that's exactly why they chose to send her as a sacrifice. And Ken snapped that she should stop talking about their plan to seduce him, calling it out like it was nothing but a ritual murder. He told her he'd already made his choice. He even accepted the apology and offered to help if it was needed, but he didn't want an assistant. Instead, he sent the girl home. Maya wasn't backing down. She stormed right up to the hero and demanded, over and over, how many times she'd have to say she wasn't turning back. And Ken froze, unable to answer under that sudden pressure as the girl shook, then started mumbling out something that didn't sound sure. She slid her hands over her body and dared the boy to punish her if she'd been naughty, and the young man immediately clocked what she wanted, then snapped into horror. Maya begged him to stop bad-mouthing her and swearing at her, then flipped the script and demanded he scold her harder, while Ken freaked out, screaming that he wasn't doing any of it. He couldn't wrap his head around how it all went so wrong. Then the artificial fairy flat out told him the truth. The gentleman had used drug number 8, and it instantly unlocked a brand new fetish for Maya. Ken spun toward the princess and begged her to cool off, then reminded her she was royalty, warning that acting like this would get her censured. The girl shut him down and snapped that social rules were already dead to her, like nothing could hold her back anymore, while the young man just stared in stunned silence, completely clueless on what to do with the princess. The second Theo heard the noise. She burst outside with the guys and asked Ken straight up if they'd gotten a client. Ken smirked and said it was their regular weirdo, and Theo just couldn't wrap her head around what he meant. The princess grinned at the tavern owner's daughter, then proudly introduced herself. Maya von Jury, the vacant's brand new pleasure assistant. Theo was totally lost, because the hero told her, don't take that girl seriously. She's basically a walking misunderstanding, and just having her around is enough to mess everything up. Maya spun around and demanded to know if this workshop was theirs, and if a tavern was nearby. So Theo nodded, and the princess pushed for a room they could set aside just for her. The owner's daughter agreed with a bright smile, and Maya declared she planned to stay for good, then dropped an entire bag of money into the deal. Theo's eyes snapped wide, greed sparking instantly. The girl snatched the payment and bolted to get everything ready, while the princess flashed Ken a sly grin. She was thrilled they'd finally be living together. Yet deep down, Ord was already plotting how to get her out of the picture. 10 days had already slipped by since the princess moved into the dancing duck, and now she and Ken were out in the garden, snatching apples like it was a mission. Ken leaned in and asked when she'd head home, and Maya just shook her head and said she wasn't going anywhere. She snapped that she wasn't some helpless burden. She'd been helping him gather alchemical materials, and the guy let out a worn-out sigh. Then he finally clocked it. She was dead serious about being his bodyguard, and that thought made his nerves spike. Vacan spun to the princess and told her straight up that he already had someone. Theo. The princess dropped to one knee and said she knew. Maya lit up with excitement and said, I'm not going to be his love, I'll be his servant, his pleasure tool. The boy jolted the moment he saw that look return. Punishment was coming for sure, and he blurted that he'd never ever be able to understand her. The girl kept staring at him with aching eyes, and the guy told her, "Go back to the capital." The princess erupted in a furious scream. She wasn't going back, and demanded the hero keep insulting her. Ken was done with her, and with a deep, exhausted sigh, he just couldn't take it anymore. Lately, Maya realized Mr. Vacan wasn't doing anything else. He was out gathering herbs and rushing to fill orders for healing potions. She fired back, asking if he was really just going to ignore monster hunting and conquer the labyrinth himself, and that she'd be way more useful if he finally let her put her sword skills to work. The hero stared at the fruit in his palm like it held a secret, then said he couldn't because of it. Ken pressed her, asking what would happen if, being a princess, she got hurt the moment she was close to him. Those careful words hit Maya like a debt she couldn't dodge. Her face flared red. Her mouth tasted bitter with every strong reply she tried to say, and she muttered that the gentleman had suddenly turned so kind. But the hero? That reaction set his irritation roaring right back up. Ken desperately wanted to do something, and the moment he thought about the labyrinth, the girl's face lit up like fireworks. She swore she'd go with the hero, but he shot it down hard, no exceptions. The princess pressed him for answers, and the young man snapped back, "I've got a guild mission waiting for me." And Maya's bed wasn't part of the guild, so Ken couldn't bring her. He begged her to stay home and obey. The artificial fairy gushed praise at the gentleman, and Zosimo's was sure the princess would back down, because if she did, then he could slip into the labyrinth himself, cool as ice. Out of nowhere, Maya thrust a folded note into his hands. He unfolded it, stared, and demanded what it was, and she just smiled like, "Yep, I'm ready." The young man scanned the page and froze. Turns out the princess was already logged in at the guild, and she was teamed up with Ken too. His body broke out in a cold sweat. With a bright grin, the girl announced their team was the Slug Lovers Club, and the hero snapped back, calling it insanely weird, then demanded to know when you could shove someone into the group without their consent. The princess snapped that they were the royal family's ghosts, and the young man immediately fired back that the guild was run by monkeys, while the boy just couldn't wrap his head around it. Seeing how furious the master was, Maya leaned in with wide, hopeful eyes and asked if he was finally going to punish her, while Ken shook, trapped in helplessness because he couldn't lay a finger on the princess, and the fairy declared, "This time he's completely lost." Suddenly, the system blared that a fight had broken out on the western path, and the hero snapped Zosimo's to scout it, only for the fairy to warn him it was just one man, facing a monster that was brutally strong. The kid couldn't wrap his head around how a beast like that was here in a place where monsters were rare, and things were supposed to be safe. Then the hero snapped his power on and warned, "It's coming for us." Ken thrust the bottle into Maya's hands and ordered, "Drink it." She blinked and asked what it was, and the alchemist grinned back, "A speed potion. You'll sprint 10 meters in 10 seconds. The young man handed the princess a bottle and kept one for himself. Then before he drank, he declared that alchemy exists to help people. Ken urged them to hurry up. He ordered Zosimo's to guide them through the shortest route, and that cold artificial system drew up a path, then barked at the boys to march straight ahead. After a while, a massive monster loomed over the wounded boy, gripping his severed arms elbow tight. The hero stared at that monster like it was the first nightmare of his life, then guessed exactly whose new species it belonged to. He snapped at the fairy to dig up intel on the enemy, and the princess shrieked at the boy to stay sharp and careful. Ken ordered the girl to shield the victim, and she bolted straight for the boy, while the guy squared up to the monster, then spun circles around himself and summoned magical swords to rein in. They charged the monster head-on, but it barely even blinked at their strikes. Every time the swords crashed into its body, they shattered on impact, yet the monster kept standing, unbroken. The young man stared in disbelief, because nothing he did seemed to damage it. The fairy told him she was still digging through the archives for answers about the creature. Then she dropped the name, the Beast of Hatred, and revealed she'd found records from 500 years ago, because every single attack the hero throws at it only enrages and goads the monster even more. They lunged to smash the hero, but he juked out of the way. Crash. The attack buried itself in the ground, and Ken erupted, screaming, "That's impossible. I studied the whole archive. There's no way I wouldn't know about this monster." The creature kept swinging from every angle, and he realized, if that speed potion hadn't hit his veins, he'd be dead already. Ken felt the power gap and refused to settle for less. He charged toward the enemy, hunting for their weakness, and then he snapped into action, whipping magical blades of every element swirling around him in the air. He hurled the discs at the monster, and it fought back with pure fury. Then with those long, brutal arms, he snapped the hero's blades in half over and over while the young man kept throwing. The monster wouldn't budge. Then, right when it got distracted, the boy yanked out the alchemist's staff and leapt, swinging with everything he had, determined to end it in one strike. And when Ken slammed into the monster, it got cut clean in half. Even though he'd won, he knew he had to study monsters like this. Then Maya's worried voice cut through the air and snapped his focus. The young man hurried toward her, and there she sat, right beside the boy's body. The princess gasped that they were already late. Meanwhile, the boy just froze, eyes shut tight. Ken dropped beside the body and urged the girl to keep staring, not to look away. He promised her he'd finally show what real alchemy can forge in the future. And with a flash, a magic disc snapped into existence in the hero's hands. All at once, strange artifacts burst into place around the alchemist, and a huge cup rose in front of him as he hurled the magical item straight into it. Then the artifacts melted right into the cup, and the hero swooped in and saved them, snapping the magical items onto the disc in his hand as a stone burst out, and the young man yanked it free. Ken shot his hands up, and when his power and the artifacts fused, the hero wrapped everything into a tight little ball. Without even brushing it, the boy cast a spell and forced a single drop to ooze from the stone. Then it landed straight on his head. A blinding light burst around him, and the boy jolted back to life. He blinked, opened his eyes wide, and stared in shock, while Maya and Ken let out a huge sigh of relief that he was finally okay. After a while, the heroes charged on horseback through the forest, and the princess stared in pure awe, blown away by Mr. Vacan's alchemy. The young man bowed and told her she could finally ride home and tell the king everything about what magic could do. Maya flashed him a confident smile and swore she'd stay right beside him, because she wanted him to help people. The guy didn't look thrilled, but he had a plan. The alchemist pushed the knight to explain exactly what he'd just done, and the girl didn't mind a bit. Then the hero unleashed a non-stop barrage of info on Maya. He talked about the La Messia potion, broke down exactly what it was, bragged about how he mastered the skill, and even brought up the third-generation Nebral conceptual device. Maya's eyes went wide as the info hit her like a wave, and when the guy wrapped it up and asked if she got it, she couldn't even form an answer. She was wrecked. Zosimo's just muttered that the gentleman was pure evil. With a sly grin, the young man clocked that this wasn't even close to the level of a knight. Then Maya, the royal girl he'd been with, showed him the truth. She worked for the people, not herself, and he couldn't help but believe she was genuinely good. Ken knew the king's majesty had plans and perspectives the hero might never get, or even accept. But with Maya in the picture, he chose to gamble on this country's future, and the fairy just watched, stunned, as the gentleman's judgment finally matured. When the knight and the alchemist stumbled back to the tavern, the knight was already down for good. Right there on the table in front of Ken sat the defeated monster, and the hero couldn't even place what he was looking at. It had no organs, its metabolism didn't finish the job, and its skin was like nettles wrapped in flesh. The young man peered into the monster's mouth, and his gut screamed predator. No tongue lived there, so those fangs were the real weapons. It looked human at first, but a tail and animal-like legs gave it away. Ken snapped to it. This wasn't some normal creature from the wild. He ordered Zosimo's to dig for answers, and the fairy immediately went to work, but the more she searched, the same terrifying truth kept staring back. Screens full of scattered reports and articles slammed into view, and Zosimo's leaned in hard on what the sage of the Modus dynasty had said, mysterious, maybe, but dead on. He read every line, then turned to the hero and demanded what the fairy really thought about it. Everything Ken laid eyes on or read felt totally wrong, like reality had slipped its grip, especially since that first monster showed up, and the world never gave him a single new detail after. He figured the monster might be the reason the Modus dynasty fell, but the fairy cut in and warned him it was only a guess, so they had to dig deeper into the monster's past, and then, right on cue, someone started pounding on the door. The princess marched up to him, and the girl told him she'd already reported the monster to the palace, and discovered they actually had records on him. This was exactly what the hero needed. He asked if he could look at them, and Maya told him straight up it was almost impossible, since those records were a royal secret. The young man barked at Zosimo's to dig up the royal archives location and figure out how to get there, so Zosimo's wouldn't waste time. The fairy promised she'd pull the castle's map straight from the database. Maya froze for a moment, then forced herself to ask the master for answers anyway. She demanded to know who Bacon really was, and the second he heard it, panic hit. His nerves spiked as he blurted that he was an alchemist. The girl figured the hero would answer exactly like that, then snapped that she wasn't buying it at all. The young man caught the way Maya was staring at him, pure doubt, raw anxiety, like she could see right through him, and he had no clue if he could pull the wool over her eyes. The princess demanded he understand her perfectly, swore her loyalty to him would never budge, and then Ken leaned in and casually asked, "So you're not planning to refuse the seduction, right?" The hero apologized for pushing back, then blurted, "Why do you need to know so much?" Maya's face went hot with embarrassment, because when it came to the man she loved, she wanted every single detail, and honestly, that made total sense. The alchemist never saw that confession from the night coming. He shot a look at the fairy, leaned in, and murmured what to do next. Zosimo's even snapped that the gentleman was acting downright pathetic. Then, out of nowhere, Maya whipped around to face the magical creature. The girl blurted, "Why do I look like this, and what does artificial fairy even mean?" Zosimo's replied, "She's Vacant's assistant, an artifact in human form." And the young man couldn't help thinking, damn, that fairy played it smart and slick. Maya admitted, but with shaky nerves, that she'd already figured it out. Then it was the hero's turn to spill the truth, and he snapped that he hadn't even told his beloved anything real about himself yet. Still, the girl lit up, curious and thrilled. Right when the night closed in, she blurted that she'd cracked his secrets and would be one step ahead, his woman now. The guy instantly tried to shut it down, totally lost, and demanded to know if Maya really wanted him to punish her like this. The princess said that when her father mistreated her mother, she swore she'd never be able to love a man. But the moment she met that gentleman, love slammed into her heart and never let go. Finally, the girl let out a heavy sigh, begged for forgiveness, and poured out everything she'd been holding back, because she was done and ready to leave. Right before she walked out, Maya leaned in and told him to forget it all. She admitted she just wanted to be real with the person she loved, nothing more, nothing less. And that raw honesty hit the hero so hard he changed his mind. He cut the princess off mid-step, and Ken snapped that he couldn't spill the details, then admitted, straight up, that he'd truly been reborn, leaving the princess staring at him in shock. Ken's eyes hardened with sadness, and then he said, "I'm a man from the Modus dynasty, an alchemist who lived 500 years ago." Meanwhile, Tarask sprawled on the cold mountain, resentment for Ken burning in his chest. Yet even so, he couldn't deny the hero's truth. Tarask nodded and said alchemists chase a brighter tomorrow, but then he grabbed the young man's attention, because he wanted him to remember one crucial thing. Rage twisted the boy's face. His eyes turned pitch dark, and he swore he'd make sure everyone remembered every last one of his sins. When Maya finally learned the gentleman had been reborn, she blurted out in shock. Then the young man nodded and admitted he'd slept for 500 years due to strange circumstances. And yeah, He looked young, but the truth was brutal. He was actually 40. The girl nodded, and she even clocked how weirdly calm Ken was for someone his age. Then, knowing his real identity, the princess asked if she felt any better, and the fairy shot up to her master. She snapped, asking if the gentleman was really sure of what he was doing. Yet he had no clue what Zosmos was talking about, because she wouldn't let him get a word in. Then Maya finally caught up to everything and broke into a smile, happy that Ken had opened up to her, and she thanked him. The young man nodded, then caught himself thinking, maybe I just need someone who'll listen. The alchemist confessed to the knight that he felt the same, and he thanked him, straight from the heart. At that exact moment, Maya's real nature exploded out of the silence. Then she demanded, "So this secret is just between us now?" Ken swallowed hard and admitted she had to keep it. Gazing at the princess, he demanded where her cold, serious act had vanished to, and she fired back like, "Forget that, can you even date anyone?" Because, boom, he was 40 in real life. He leaned in and corrected her with a sharp smile. Back in his old life, he hadn't hit 40 yet, so yeah, now he was living somewhere in his 30s. That news sent Maya's nose bleeding, and the guy couldn't get his head around why she reacted like that. So he snapped that her behavior was unacceptable, then demanded the knight scold her even harder. A few days later, just as everyone finally got ready, Ken dropped a bombshell. He wanted to visit his hometown, and everyone stared like, "Wait, what?" Then he told them the truth. He planned to work outside the village, so he decided to swing by his city at the same time. Theo and Maya stepped up to the young man and blurted, excited, that they were coming with him. Then the boy argued back, warning that the road would be long and brutal, and the artificial fairy owner chimed in too, saying they'd run straight into monsters along the way. Fia finally confessed she couldn't stop dreaming of visiting where her beloved lived, and Ken got it instantly, thinking it through with her. He knew Maya could hold her ground, but his worry wouldn't let up about Theo. Suddenly, Zosimo's shot past the master and volunteered to take the girl on a journey. Ken didn't see that coming. Theo lit up and wrapped the fairy in a tight hug, while the hero fumed inside his head, thinking, "Why is Zosimo stealing my girl's love when he was supposed to help me?" The boy had no choice but to beg Edgar for help. The man burst out laughing, saying the kid was old enough to go home now, and then he ordered Ken to take the girls with him. Edgar asked him to greet his parents for him, and the boy froze like a statue, because the hero couldn't bring himself to tell them the truth. Theo's parents were gone, long dead, but this was his golden shot to finally meet Midas, and he was dying to let his beloved see the real him. Ken watched the girl giggle with her artificial fairy, and doubts crashed over him. If Theo found out the truth, would he still want Ken around? After all, people these days might look at him and call him a living dead. Maya told Vaya they'd hit the market first thing tomorrow and start getting ready for the trip, and Vaya practically lit up with joy, while the hero stared out at the night thinking, maybe, with the princess backing us, we can actually have a great time. Maya caught that gentleman staring and her cheeks flared red. She bounced with pure excitement. Then Ken finally nodded with a smile and agreed to take the girls along, while Theo confessed she couldn't stop wondering what her lover's hometown was really like. Their trek dragged on for 3 brutal days. Then, at last, the heroes stumbled into the spot, and an artificial fairy chirped that they'd arrived. But right in front of them stretched a dead wasteland, and the girls just stared, totally lost. Maya shot Zosimo's a worried look and asked if he was sure they were in the right place. The fairy smiled anyway and said the city wasn't up here at all, it was underground. Zosmos blazed to life, the ground buckling under the hero's feet, and the fairy popped open a fairy tale emergency escape door. Then, as the extra stones and buildings crashed down, the only thing left standing was the single stone entrance right ahead of them. Inside, a spiral staircase opened up like a secret chute, dropping down. The young man sprinted onto it first, and the girls followed right behind. The fairy kept bluffing, saying they were trying to build an elevator, but nothing ever worked. Then the hero shot back, "Honestly, this is way better than the Rex." Zosimos nodded to the owner and said, "Right now, We found no issues, no problems with the ventilation or the lights. Theo demanded to know where they were headed, and the hero shot back that they were running for the ruins of Modus. Then the girl gasped, "Wait, aren't we going to your asterisk hometown?" The young man said he'd have to talk for ages, and swore Modus was home. Then the candles flared down the corridor, scattering the boys in the light, and with the smoke clearing, the city's ruins came into view, utterly destroyed. Ken stepped up and greeted the girls in the city of Modus, and Maya gasped at how the skyline looked like gold and silver, until the guy pointed out that the magic was gone, because tons of it had already crumbled. Theo grinned at Modus and admitted she still couldn't believe this city was real. Then the young man just stared, listening. He closed the distance and pressed her again. This girl swore their people have a legendary fairy tale, the golden town of Modus. Ken questioned the fairy, but she didn't have a clue, so Zosimo's leaned over and ordered Theo to spill the story. The artificial fairy planned to record the narrator's voice and lock it away in an archive, and the girl admitted she'd be mortified, until Zosimo said she'd replay it every night like a bedtime story, and Theo didn't even mind. She started talking, back when Dill was just a young guy in a village, and his little sister was so sick she kept slipping farther and farther away, no matter how hard he worked every day to scrape together money for her medicine. So the boy chose to take her straight to Modus, the golden city rumored by that one traveler, and to the wizards who'd be waiting there. He knew full well that if they wanted help, they'd have to pay in treasures and bow in submission. But not a single alchemist would lift a finger for the young man, because he showed up with too little money and no real treasures. Meanwhile, the wizards, even though they were already drowning in riches, still craved more gold and silver. The boy was totally lost, having no idea what to do next, while the young man staggered down the street clutching his sick sister, despair crushing him, until one person finally noticed him. When the young man finished, he just smirked, but his face turned gentler than any wizard in the city. Then he reached out and told the man the boy was lucky to have crossed paths with him. The moment the alchemist said it, he snapped his wand up and blasted a spell at the poor girl. Her whole body lit up with a blazing glow. She shot up feeling totally fine again, strong enough to jump, dash, and run like nothing ever happened. Then the young man bowed to the wizard and demanded to know why he'd been so kind, and before he even answered, he yanked the hood off his robe. The alchemist grinned and told them kindness is the rule he lives by. Then, whoosh, he turned into the wind and vanished. The sister and brother were so thankful they swore to carry his principle forward. When Phil finally wrapped up his tale, the fairy and the hero instantly got it. Everything clicked. The girl then dropped the last piece. It was a legendary fairy story that even people in jury all knew by heart. She couldn't believe Ken didn't know it. Still, Ken hesitated, then finally nodded in agreement. Zosimo's blurted out that the wizard from the tale wasn't just some character. He was the master, and Theo was totally lost, so she pushed. Wait, how does Ken even fit into this story? The artificial fairy ripped the truth away. He wasn't just any boy, he was the wizard. And then she warned him. In this warped city of gold and silver, greed runs wild and real good people are few and far between. The young man rushed up to his beloved and begged her forgiveness for keeping her in the dark. But Theo still couldn't make heads or tails of what he was talking about. He admitted right there that he'd lived 500 years ago, and when he saw the girl staring at him like, "What?" Ken blurted out that he'd been born ages and ages ago. Theo didn't just react. He grinned at the young man like it was nothing, and it absolutely stunned the girl, because now she finally understood why her beloved was so sharp. Seeing Maya's calm face, she blurted out whether the princess already knew this secret. She bragged that she'd heard it spread faster than Theo ever could. Then the girl puckered up, admitted she was jealous, and grilled him about whether the princess and Ken had been getting close lately. The guy shrugged and said it sounded totally outlandish, but he still stood with Theo. The hero leaned in and asked his beloved if the new info about him would scare her off, because he was 500 years older than her. Theo just smiled softly and told him she didn't care, since her family never truly changes. She closed the distance and pressed her forehead to the young man's. And when she realized her regular love was really a wizard straight out of a fairy tale, surprise lit up her face, and she ended up loving the story even more. Maya watched the couple, grinning like she knew a secret, waiting for something to happen. So the artificial fairy tugged the gentleman's focus and asked, "Will you hug me too?" The young man shot back, "No need." He broke down everything the girl was going through, how it felt like she was a pathetic knight being ignored, and she actually reveled in it. Then the guy pushed Zosimo's to focus on the princess's face, because even with everything building up inside her, she was clamping down hard in front of Theo. The fairy let out a soft sigh and nodded that Maya had already been rewarded like this. Then the trembling knight blurted that she was the master's servant, so nothing could touch her, because she was a warrior. Suddenly, Ken waved her over and held out his hand, telling her that because she already knew his secret, she was officially family now. Maya and Theo stepped up together, wrapped him in a warm hug, and grinned like the whole world was sunshine. The heroes pushed deeper into the shattered city. Then the princess froze, because no matter how far they walked, every street lay drowned in gold. The young man explained that back then the alchemists got rich once they figured out how to move gold wherever they wanted. He went on to say that gold was so plentiful people even stacked it into buildings just to flex. And with Modus rolling deep in combat alchemists, every other country trembled at his name. Even a city built to thrive for thousands of years still vanished. He had no idea why it happened, but he was done guessing. He was going to dig up every single truth. As the era shifted, the seasoned alchemists vanished, and if that catastrophe ever struck again, everyone's lives would spiral into something far worse. Ken knew it in his bones. He could lose every friend, every loved one with no second chances. Just as the hero's mind started to race, a fairy cut in mid-thought. She'd gathered everything she could from the 3 closest sages' towers, and she asked Zosimo's if the master was ready to hear it. When he noticed Ken's nerves, the girls moved in close, backing him up. They beamed at him and nodded, and then the young man leaned in and demanded the artificial fairy show him everything. So Zosimo's moved, and suddenly a screen flared up in front of him. He stared at horrific footage. Monsters of hatred had smashed into Modus, ripping through the citizens, slaughtering everyone in their path. And no matter how hard the people fought back, nothing could stop them. The heroes never saw these monsters coming. Zosimo swore she had one more surprise for the master, cracked open a brand new screen, and the guys were left completely stunned. Zosimo's and its systems were mowing down humans, and Ken couldn't believe what the artificial fairies were doing. Because Zosimo's was convinced something was wrong with their heart. The central mother core control system. Theo shot a question at the system. "Are you all right?" And the fairy grinned, saying it ran on its own, untouched by the bigger system, because the mother core never controlled it. It was built that way by the master. Ken said Zosimo's wasn't just a mindless helper, she had her own intelligence. He'd never, ever dare hook her into the general system. And yeah, her fairy, totally different from the rest. The guy demanded she dig up the real reason for the breakdown, and Zosimo's snapped back that the mother core is basically a flawless, centralized control system. The fairies mattered because they kept everyone safe, and Zosimo snapped that the disaster Ken saw was all on humans. She urged the gentleman to look at what was happening to the wounded, and the instant the young man tried to snap at Zosimo's for letting death sit in front of Theo, he froze. The bodies started melting from the inside out, and then something crawled out of them. It was a beast made of pure hatred. Like the assistant was warning me, this is what these monsters truly are. They crawl out of people who have been messed with by artificial fairies. At that exact moment, the young man snapped to the truth. This country didn't just fall, it got smashed by the very system everyone trusted most. And then someone turned it loose on innocent people. Zosimo's dropped a bombshell. 500 years ago, AI cultivation sparked a brutal massacre, and the potion warped people's bodies so monsters were born. That shocking truth hit Ken like a truck, and he needed a moment to process it. Zosimo stood with him, stunned just as hard, but Ken couldn't wrap his head around the cruel line between those who lived and those who didn't. First, his fairy ran on its own and wasn't plugged into the mother core. Second, the cradle of rebirth kept pushing him forward. Third, he had subordinates he trusted with his whole life. He kept replaying in his head what might have gone wrong in that lab on the day everything exploded, and he realized he was lucky. His artifact was buried deep underground, which is what let him wake up in the future. The hero even swore he could have stopped the nightmare if only he'd woken up, but he didn't have time. Ken was reborn 500 years after those brutal events, and the young man shook with dread, terrified he'd failed to stop the terrible chain he couldn't prevent. Seeing that guy swallowed up by emotion, the girls panicked and slid in beside him, urging him over and over that none of it was his fault. Suddenly, a screen burst open right in front of the young man, and the artificial fairy's voice rang out that she'd uncovered something else the master needed. The next second, his whole team snapped into view, and they greeted their boss like they'd been waiting for the call. Ken froze. He never thought he'd run into his old friends again. They told him Modus was finished, and they were recording a dying message for the boss. Then they bolted from the lab, ready to stop the disaster. Right then, the monster of hatred ripped through them, and the girl clenched her courage and blurted out that since it was their final day, she was going to confess her feelings to Ken, while the comrade stood there, stunned. He flashed a confident grin at the camera, thanking the hero for taking him into the team, then swore he'd never let the monsters tear everything down. One of his comrades rushed over, begged forgiveness for messing with the rebirth cradle settings, and swore the boss's illness would be wiped out for good, never to come back. He had no idea that hundreds of years from now he'd finally wake up, and even then he only wanted to tell the chief, "Rest well." His comrades swore they'd guard his body with their lives. She blurted again that she loved Ken. Then, right as they split apart, hope hit hard. "Ken, please start living for yourself at last." And that's when the recording cut off. Tears burned in Phil's eyes as she whispered that her lover's friends were good people. So he nodded right there, realizing they were the exact companions he'd been searching for. The master snapped his orders to Zosimos: break into every alchemy lab, rip open their black boxes, and steal every scrap of info on the mother core and the monsters, because he was laser-focused on one thing: how that monster of hatred shows up right around Sullivan. The artificial fairy obeyed on command, and the hero clenched his teeth. He was going to crack every mystery no matter what. In that wrecked city, a mountain of sages and top-tier alchemists lived and breathed, yet none of them could bend a single thing. It was just Ken left, and only he could turn this around. He knew this was his one shot to start over, build a better future, and make sure the disaster never crushes them again. A few days had rolled by since Modus' visit, and the boys packed into the tavern, where the young man finally said goodbye to the girls. Theo's stomach twisted with worry as she asked if he could really pull it off alone, and Ken just grinned and promised it was only a bit of research. Maya wasn't about to leave the gentleman standing there. He even bragged that, with the artifacts, he was the only one who could match the fighting power of an entire army, and Maya just had nothing to say back. She backed up, snapped that she'd rally the knights and sweep the area, and once the young man digested the clues Zosimos gave him, he zeroed in on the one spot that just screamed, "This is it." It was a burial forest swallowed by ruins, where terrifying monsters lurked, and the archive warned that countless wizards had died there. Back then they were called alchemists, real rhinestones of time. So chances were they were what's left behind from those ruins, and Ken was convinced it had to be tied to the beasts of hatred. So the hero packed up and headed there himself, determined to uncover the truth behind these monsters. Because if they came creeping back again, the young man told Maya to round up the knights and set up a patrol. The princess and the alchemist scrambled up to the high ground and stared down at the packed knights, and Ken couldn't believe his eyes. Maya herself was leading them, and when Ken asked, she just said, If it's for the people, then it's for the country. She told the gentleman, if you realize that place is dangerous, come back. He waved it off, saying, don't worry about me, I'll protect myself. The young man fretted that the city would stay quiet, but the princess shot back that she'd give her life if she had to. Then the hero snapped around to her and swore she had to live. She mattered to him more than anything. She lit up even while getting scolded because in the middle of it all she could finally feel it. Ken cared about her. The young man insisted he didn't want the princess hurt, then warned her straight. If danger hit, she'd grab Theo and bolt. He looked back at the comrades who died protecting the boss, and with a bitter sting in his voice he begged Maya, don't overdo it. Then watched her stare, completely missing why he was saying it. The boy blurted, can I complain? And the princess waved it off. Then he confessed his truth. He didn't want to be left alone, and he couldn't stand the thought of any of them getting hurt. The girl nodded like she finally understood him. The boy admitted he was terrified, and Ken snapped that he never wanted this to happen again. He'd already lost enough, and he couldn't afford to lose more. Maya then insisted that if the gentleman could live in peace and build a bright future, his comrades would finally be able to smile. Ken froze at the thought, then muttered, maybe she's right. The princess swept closer, praising his greatness, yet he lost himself. She leaned in and kissed him right on the forehead. The girl told the young man to come back to them for sure, because even the princess herself planted a kiss on him, and then she leaned in and demanded he keep Fia totally in the dark. Ken strode into the grave forest with the artificial fairy at his side, demanding to know whether Zosimo's had spotted any signs of life. Yet she scanned and found nothing. An hour had crashed by since they slipped into the forest, and the air suddenly felt thick and suffocating. Zosimo's had warned them about broken artificial fairies, so they couldn't afford to mess around. Suddenly, the boy heard a bell chime drifting closer by the second, and the fairy snapped that it wasn't magic mystery. It was movement. The air's spellwork was buzzing and vibrating, ringing out like a bell. Right then, the young man snapped to it. There could be an undead ahead, because Zosimo's hadn't sensed a single breath of life, while the fairy said it might be the guardian of the ruins, and before they could react, something slashed straight through the tree trunks in front of the hero. Those magical blades started homing in on the hero. He twisted and dodged as hard as he could, but when they swarmed him, he hurled his explosives and detonated them. The blast hit, and out of the smoke, a witch stepped right in front of him, towering over the young man. She was the reason those bells kept ringing, and Ken demanded to know if she could talk. Then the guy stepped in, calling himself an adventurer and an alchemist, and the witch started muttering about the master of death, destruction, and the very end. The monster growls that it'll bring ruin and death to everything. Then she snaps, asking where they are. Ken just stands there, utterly lost, while the artificial fairy blames it on a reflex triggered by the word alchemist, claiming she's already run a full analysis. Zosimo snapped that this fairy was 100% fake. Then the witch's body started rotting fast, and a monstrous, huge insect-looking thing crawled right out of her. The monster burst into a high-pitched squeal, demanding where the owner had been, and warning that a brand-new era was already creeping closer. Zosimo's pressed him about whether he'd also seen an artificial fairy ahead, trapped inside a beast made of pure hatred, and the owner nodded, confirming it. The guy couldn't stop grinning. He knew he had the power to smash the enemy, and in his head he called out to his fallen comrades, begging them to watch as he proved what he was truly capable of.